Having fun out there? Huh? Like you could use the rescue.
Is it 41?
Yeah.
31.
Or is it
41.
42?
Is it no, I just made a folder for 41. But like it would be
It's episode. Let's roll with it. It's episode 41, everybody. Hello,
it?
welcome to Friends Per Second. This is the podcast, a bi-weekly podcast where we talk about video games. We get together. We talk to interesting people. I'm Jake Baldino. I'm joined as always by Lucy.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
I'm great.
In person.
In person.
Yeah,
another
yeah.
in-person pod. Ralph, how are you?
I'm good. Very excited to be here. 32
Yes.
hours it took me to get here. I love Australia being the arse end of the planet. It's fantastic.
It's a long plane.
It is
ride.
the
Yeah.
longest plane rides of all.
Where are we? What are we doing?
We are in Boston. Wait, how you say it?
No, that was good. That was good.
We're in Boston, Massachusetts. Is that how you say it? Massachusetts. And we are currently at Ghost Story Games Studio. We're like sitting right here, right now.
They let us borrow this room.
Yep.
Yeah, let's borrow this room. We are here to play Judas for 5 hours and then to speak one-on-one with the game's lead, Ken Levine, for an hour and a half. That is what is happening. It's crazy. We got the invitation to do this a while ago, and there were obviously lots of back and forth discussions to like set all this up.
Yep.
Yeah.
But yeah, finally came to agreement on all of it. And
We paid our own way.
We did.
We dragged ourselves here, and we got to see a version of the game, not a full preview event where it's like they
Yes.
fly out press to like check out a game. This is still very much a work in progress thing. So we're not making like huge judgment calls on
Yeah,
certain.
yeah.
We can't just be
So
like, it's
much
bad.
is going to change.
Yeah, and I guess that's something that we really want to drill down on and be really clear about. This is not a preview. Like previews are a point in time when the game is kind of pretty close to finish.
Curated
and
experience.
Very curated, and they welcome people in. They're like, yeah, give us the pros and cons, talk to your audience about what you like and don't like, whatever else. This is a pre-preview in the sense that the game is still, it's not at the point where you can really assess it. You know what I mean? The purpose of this discussion is not to provide like critical feedback on the game. It's really to talk about like, well, what is this game? You know, like what is it aiming at? What's it built on, etc. And then that allows us to have those sorts of conversations because this game is very surprising, if you know what I mean. Like it's,
Oh, yeah.
we were not anticipating, like you think this is Bioshock in space when you start playing and you're like, it's Bioshock in space. It's definitely not Bioshock in space. It's got a whole bunch of other shit in there that is not what you'd expect at all. And I guess this conversation is really just about what are those things, and then having a chat with Ken about like, well, why did you make those decisions? What are you aiming at here? So that we really want to pitch that what the purpose of this discussion is as separate from a typical preview.
Yeah, also it is significant because up until this point, none of us knew what the game is.
Yeah.
So that's kind of
Yeah.
what we want to focus on is like figuring out what it is. Like they you know, us speaking to them, it's like the first time we really have this info. Anyone really has this info. So
That's the thing, going back in, knew we were coming here. I was looking at the trailers that have been released and the very, very short PlayStation blog post.
Yes.
It doesn't really tell you much. And so, they didn't give us a presentation. Typically when you come to events like this, they'll have this presentation. It's like, you will see this, and this.
Yeah.
Nothing. Like they said, hi,
Yeah.
here's what you're going to be playing.
No, we played it.
See ya.
Yeah. And we played like a full 5 hours, by the way. We played from the very beginning of the game.
Jake didn't move, by the way.
Yeah, Jake didn't get up for 5 straight hours.
Ralph and I-
Proper
Ralph and
gamer.
I-
yeah, you guys
both
keep
got
getting
up.
up. I'm like, what are you guys doing?
I had to pee.
No.
You just sat and you were like,
Yep. I was like, no, we
It's
got
like
games to play.
he was like on a winning, like at a blackjack table on a winning streak. He's like, I'm not getting up, man. I'll break my streak,
So we do have a really interesting conversation with Ken. But this first part, we want to kind of dive into what the game is
Yeah.
and like some top level thoughts. The one thing I think I'll just start if you guys don't mind.
Yeah.
The thing that came across for me, the biggest thing I kind of came in expecting was like the Irrational, the Bioshock, the Ken Levine and his teams, like their touch on story and really how that was going. And not that I got what I expected, but I got something I got what I was looking for.
Yeah.
Where like
Yes.
they're being creative, they're trying different things with storytelling, and that's very apparent from how characters appear on screen and deliver their dialogue as you walk around.
Yeah.
To the main character herself, how she's presented. There's a lot going on story wise, and like that's I touch on that first because like that's always like my favorite thing about a game.
Yeah.
I think definitely you can see the kind of, when you are Jack in Bioshock, you are this nameless, quiet man. And then Booker, obviously being voiced by Troy Baker, there's a lot more to him. But even at the end of the game, when you start to see his face more, it feels weird to see Booker's face because you don't really associate him. And so even immediately, you see Judas's face a lot in reflections.
Yeah.
And they're really doing this really cool thing to sort of ground you with that character and get familiar with her. But to your point about kind of the Bioshock of it all, a big Bioshock fan, it felt like I kind of knew part of the language of the world already in terms of things that I could interact with. Even the way that you get, so if you've seen the trailer, that you'll have a kind of power in one hand, a weapon in the other hand, and immediately I'm given firepower.
Yeah.
And immediately I see 2 enemies standing in a pool of oil.
Yes.
And I just...
That's how we do that.
And
Absolutely.
that's-
Yeah, chain reaction.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and popping audio logs as well.
Yes.
Yes.
There is a lot of that, but then what I really like is a lot of the game is centered around the big 3. There are these 3 important characters that essentially there's like a favorability rating, and like you can choose to like start doing one's missions, but then the other one will get pissed off. And the game's big thing and Ken's thing that he's kind of been pitching is like how all that stuff intersects and how it changes the game, how it changes like what they say to you. So you're dealing with these characters pretty constantly.
Yep.
Their presence is very frequent, and it kind of does a thing that like we've seen in other games where a character will like blip and teleport right into the environment, and they're sitting on a table and they're talking
Johnny
to you.
Silverhand.
Johnny Silverhand, the Joker in Arkham, in Batman's head, spoiler alert. But here it's like a very not static thing.
No,
No.
so you can walk around and they will zip and change.
They'll keep,
and-
so like they'll fizzle out. If you just keep walking down a hallway, you'll hear their dialogue, and then they'll zip and they're leaning up against the wall, and then it'll fizzle out again, and then they're sitting on top of a crate.
Yeah.
Or before you open a door, they'll be on the other side of the door continuing the conversation. And that is a really interesting thing for like how, the audio logs in Bioshock was like a significant thing. Like it just really worked for that game, and it pushed a lot of that story. For this, I just thought that was cool because I had to like retrain my gamer brain, because when a character appears and they start talking, I just stop.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Just sit there
too.
and talk to them. But the game like wants you to keep playing, and you can move around, and the characters are still there delivering like expressive dialogue. And I thought that was cool.
Shall we roll the dice?
So we haven't really set up the conceit of the
Yeah.
plot, and we're gonna spoiler free as much as we can. But basically, it's kind of the end of the world, and one man has seen it coming through an LLM.
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 AI basically. You use an
AI.
AI predictive model to predict the end of the world.
Yes,
So-
and so basically, rich man decides to save humanity and sends people up into space to try and find a new planet, a new golden world, and as with all, we've seen it happen with Rapture. We see it happen with Columbia. Goes to shit very quickly.
Yeah.
And so that's the ship that you're on. That's the Mayflower. And as Judas, you are suffering from memory loss,
Yes.
which is, I kind of love that because, you as the player don't have any concept either of why you're there. And so you kind of are discovering it at the same time as she is. And you've done something bad, not entirely sure what,
Very bad.
but there's no one really on the ship anymore, and the mission to save humanity, to get to Proxima, is it can go different ways, and that's where the big 3 kind of comes in, because they each have their own way that they want to either complete the mission, ignore it completely, and that's when it gets, what in terms of narratively, making decisions and then seeing the other 2 react to your decisions in various ways, either by digging at you and making, oh, you're doing that, are you? Like just the base level, to actively sabotaging you, or the ones that you've kind of aligned with will help you out. And so the thing is that we played for 5 hours.
Yeah.
And I feel like I've barely seen where that's going to go.
Yeah.
It was towards definitely the latter couple of hours of my playtime when I started to see more of it happen and more of things having an impact. But yeah, I'm really intrigued to see just how many repercussions that's going to have.
Yeah, I think in terms of setting up a foundational understanding for what this is, it is at a starting point is Bioshock in space for sure. Like you feel that the setup that you've got there with like this guy's name's Rosenberg. He's a rich dude who wants to do a big thing, and he did the big thing, and now look at all that's happening around it as a result of it, right? And the visual language of the Mayflower, the ship that you're on, is unmistakably, like Bioshock-esque. Even though it's a different architectural style, it still has the same sort of impact on you that does.
Yeah.
And in terms of its narrative approach, and it feels unmistakably Bioshock. You've got the weapon and you've got the powers in hand, and that immersive sim combat thing going on all the time.
It's different.
Yeah, like all of those things absolutely exist. So at a starting point, if everyone was to ask, is this Bioshock in space? You'd be like, yeah, sort of, absolutely, right? But then you start getting into that other territory where the big three really represent a different approach that they're taking in terms of how you advance this game's narrative. Where rather than a single narrative that unfolds and you just go beat for beat, there's potential storylines that evolve based upon who you align yourself with. And if someone like Hope, the redhead girl, is like, come and do this for me, and you're like, yeah, all right, I'll help you out for a bit, and you do like a mission or two for her, then at that point that starts to open up new narrative rewards. She tells you about herself. She tells you about why she did the things that she did. She starts warning you about the other big three, and this emergent narrative starts piecing together. And if you then decide to switch your loyalties and go with Tom for a bit, the colonel, whatever, then he's very hostile with you at first because you've been helping out Hope. And so, but then you need to kind of warm him up, and then after a while, he starts to thaw, and he gives you he starts to give you some story stuff and whatever. So the narrative approach to it is very different, and all of that stems from this kind of narrative Lego GDC talk that Ken gave years ago, which is about like building blocks in games and combining them in different ways to create these outcomes. Right? This is probably going to sound very surprising, but this is a procedurally driven game. And I would never have guessed that walking into this.
No. I mean, the first couple hours as you're getting in there, very linear. Obviously, there are things and mechanics that the game has to introduce.
Ken does in the interview too. Like he speaks to like the nuances of that procedural where there's some subtleties to it, but yeah.
It is, yeah. And that is it's a really interesting form of procedural generation and the approach to it, right? Because it's not just what I described there with the story, and it's like competing factions or whatever. It's also about the core level design where they have designed tile sets that have multiple sockets, and they basically dynamically plug different assets into these sockets to create different environments, right? And that have a different look. So they've got different themes they can apply to them on the fly. That's one thing. They've also got this procedural approach to combat where the game, if it notices that you're really into stealth, then it's going to start giving you more encounters that are challenging for that style of play and reacting to that. If they notice that you are reliant on a certain type of weapon or power or whatever, one of the big three might start dangling incentives in front of you that are going to make that easier, like that style of play easier to accomplish, right? So the whole thing is trying to respond to you, trying to adapt dynamically as you move through it with these procedural levels that load up on the fly, and also responding to your choices narratively, also responding to your choices in terms of gameplay, right? And it's too early. I think with 5 hours, we can't really assess whether or not that's really like coming together yet because we're really early on in the piece, right? But all of those pieces, I would say this, I didn't feel like I was playing a procedural game because we played those sorts of games before. It very much felt to me, it still had that kind of very curated feel that I got when playing Bioshock games. You know what I mean? Like it still had that. And I think that was what was so fascinating to me about that. I was like genuinely surprised to learn that some of the things that I experienced were procedurally generated because I was like, wow, I didn't think that would be the case, but it was.
We haven't talked about the biggest surprise is that it's actually a roguelite.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is very, very, very stunning, to be perfectly honest. The first time I encountered that, I was like, I died, and then it's like, you've just lost all your stuff. And I'm like, wait, what? What do you fucking mean I lost all my stuff? And yeah, you basically, when you die, you get booted to this space, which we won't talk
We're
about.
not
We
going to
won't
spoil because
spoil.
it's a really cool concept
It's
for
a
how it's framed.
Very interesting idea. But you do get booted, and it has its own kind of story arc that unfolds. And so, when you die, it's not like it's punishing in the sense that, you lose all your stuff and you're like, fucking hell, that's annoying. But you get, on the flip side, the narrative that unfolds in that space continues to progress. And so death doesn't feel quite as punishing as a result of that. So
and it's also the place where you can decide, I'll have another weapon slot or something, or I'll unlock a certain ability to come into the
that
game.
meta progression stuff within the roguelite.
It almost felt like a very, very light. Like in terms of like, I made significant progression and, died once. It's all about like balancing and tuning things. And it's another thing where it's hard to talk about because it is early, but I still felt like I was overall progressing through a linear action adventure story-based game with like missions to go do in different places. And then occasionally I would be reminded like, oh yeah, there are these persistent like under the hood elements and like, okay, cool. So like when you do die, it is kind of like, oh, all right, yeah, it's been a minute. So now I can make my character a little, have more health or have another weapon holster or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, it's been a very surprising like day, playing through that game, because I really did go into it thinking, cool, Bioshock in space, I'm down for that, right? And then you understand, and then you encounter that rogue light structure, and you're like, shit, I didn't expect to encounter that at all. And then you learn about how much of what you're experiencing is actually procedurally generated, and you're like, what the fuck? So I've never played a game quite like this one. I don't think there anything, like this is a AAA procedurally generated, narrative-driven first-person shooter with roguelite elements. That is ultimately that's a lot of words altogether, and it's a really ambitious mix of genre, and also mixing in some new stuff that we kind of have never really experienced before. So I found it really fascinating to figure all that out, and I think that's one thing. It's still going to take people time to really kind of wrap their heads around that. Like we're going to talk about it here now and then whatever, but when you start playing this game for yourself, whenever it comes out, it's still probably going to take you a bit of time to figure out what exactly this thing is. And because there's no easy reference point that you can point to, be like, it's like that game.
Yeah.
You can definitely bits and pieces you can pick from other games, but there's nothing quite like what this is throwing together.
Yeah.
And I still don't know. Like, I don't know how I like ultimately feel, but where I am just really like vibing with is how characters speak, emote. Like if you were into, I'd say like if you were into how Elizabeth looked, animated, spoke, it just felt kind of different. That's kind of like on overdrive here with all the characters. And then the presentation, the music, a lot of like really interesting cutscenes and just like how they play with everything. Like that stuff so far is already like working for me.
Yeah.
Totally.
She's a horrid little bitch.
She's a child.
She's a monster.
She's a child and she's provoking you. You're allowing it. Now everybody just take a breath and then we will...
I also think as well, I mean, Rapture and Columbia were as much a character in their games. And the Mayflower as well I really want to know more about it because I love sci-fi. I have a Blade Runner tattoo, man.
Sure.
I was like, and so there are questions in there about artificial intelligence and social standing and currency and public shaming. There's a lot of, as you see the artwork and, like in Colombia, all of the kind of propaganda-y posters and keeping people in line, it's very confronting. And I want to really see where that goes. Because there's one sequence that we talk about in our chat with Ken where it is this big public shaming.
You can catch glimpses of it in the trailer.
Yeah.
Is it really? Is it in there? Okay, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Where they're throwing thumbs down.
Throwing likes and it's not exactly subtle,
Yeah.
but it's interesting because I think much of the society seems to be, it's very clearly focused on order, social cohesion, and compliance. And one thing as you're exploring, you'll actually see little notes that you can click on, and they're essentially tweets that pop up. And they have someone saying something, and it has like a like and dislike, thumbs up, thumbs down count next to it. And if someone's saying something on message, it's getting lots of likes. And if someone's being subversive by being like, maybe we don't trust the powers that be, everyone's like dislike, So it's not subtle, but it's interesting because it's clearly setting up this world that is very much about like, stay on message or you will be judged for it.
Stay on a mission because, it's kind of the fate of humanity. But also, I mean, did you see that Black Mirror episode of
I don't want to watch Black Mirror.
Nosedive, the Bryce Dallas Howard one?
Is that when the guy had sex with the pig? That's the only
No,
episode
that's the
I
first.
saw.
That's the first episode.
okay.
No.
Sorry, excuse me.
It's a similar one where she is this upstanding member of society, and then through a series of events, she loses her status because she's being downvoted and everything.
Right. Okay.
And Judas is so there's the pilgrims who are upstanding members of society, and then there's the violators, and Judas is the bottom of the bottom.
Yes.
And it's the disparity between the two is quite wild, and I'm really intrigued by that because like So You've Been Publicly Shamed is one of my favorite books. It has changed the way that I interface with social media, and actually we were talking to Ken about it. He has also read it, and so I'm really intrigued to see.
Yeah.
all that.
Yeah, I think Mayflower as well structurally is a really interesting place because don't imagine a single contiguous open world.
No.
The opening sequence is a single space that you move through, but then after that, it's fun actually. There's a dog, a giant dog, robot dog, and he is the means by which you move through the rest of the space station.
He's like a bathysphere from Bioshock, if you want to use that analogy, but he's a dog.
Yes, he is a dog. You literally climb into his head. It's like a big glass dome thing.
Yeah.
And then you, at that point, a little overworld mini map pops up that you can kind of direct him around.
It's like stylized too, pixel art.
And you need to like maintain his fuel levels as you're moving, like collect fuel pickups as you go across this mini map or whatever. And that you can then choose where you want to go to next. And then you load in. It's pretty quick, and then all of a sudden you take a step forward. The lights come on in this new space, and it's in front of you, and you're now in the commons or the birthing district or something.
Oh, the intimacy district.
Intimacy district.
Everything is controlled.
Yes.
And so there's the farming district, like the milk stuff.
Yeah, the milk district. Yeah, I saw that one
That's
as
me a
well.
little bit.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, at that point, and the framing of that is very Bioshock-esque because it has these big sort of the moment where you kind of look up at the statue,
And the lights click on. Clap. It's just like,
it is totally that.
They know what they're doing.
And so they really lean into that heritage without feeling like they're just kind of copying the ideas. I think like it has the art style is unbelievable, by the way. Like I think we'll talk about enemy design, but stylistically, it's just so striking the whole way through. Everything we saw looked incredible. But I think the real standout was just the enemy designs that were crazy.
A dentist chair
Yes.
that comes at you and goes, time for a filling.
And it's like it's a dentist chair with like, a little bit of like anthropomorphic, like, so it's got like a face decal on the headrest, but it's also usually like a dead person corpse is in the chair.
Yes.
And then the chair stands up and it's like hugging the dead corpse in it as it's coming at you with needles. Really cool, really creative stuff.
Yeah. It
is.
It's engaging with them all, the enemies. It's because it's early. Is that like it's hard to judge how exactly high level encounters go down.
Sure.
So I'm curious to see how this progresses because in 5 hours the progression, and again it's something that they can tune. Progression was pretty slow. Didn't get a ton of upgrades. It took a while, and I'm curious to see how like a full blown stealth encounter with me having an invisibility cloak or a second air dash or
There's an invisibility
telekinesis.
Yeah,
Yes,
there's invisibility. Yeah.
I didn't get that.
Yeah, that's actually one of the things that you unlock. The way you unlock upgrades in this game is by doing something in the world. So there's no talent tree. There wasn't a talent tree that I saw, was it? No, I don't think so.
Don't believe
Yeah, so basically you'll shoot a canister that's next to some enemies, okay? And then at that point, the canister explodes, enemies die, but the game kind of slows down and all this binary code pops up on screen. And what's happening is that Judas is like having an idea for how she wants to create an upgrade. And so at that point, you go over to the corpse of the enemy you killed. You do this brainstorm thing to hold down a button, and you can see she sort of thinks through, like, what if I added this to my gun to do that? And that then gives you like some sort of mini side questy thing, challenge, I should say, where it's like kill 3 enemies with canisters. And you're like, okay, cool. At that point, you unlock a new upgrade for your gun or a new ability. And that is how I got Cloak. I forget exactly what I did to trigger it. Yeah. But yeah, I did something, and that was how I unlocked it, which is great because it's so surprising to go through this world and find upgrades that way. Where usually it's like, oh, here's the menu and I know the next 50 things I'm going to click on over the next whatever.
Be here.
Whatever. And it's just to have them as a random surprise. You don't know they exist. You don't know that they're coming. It's a really nice way to go about it, I think.
Ultimately, though, it does, like you unlock the ability to then go and craft that weapon.
Yes.
So there are crafting components, and I didn't have too much of a connection to those components. So that's another
like
balancing
mushrooms
thing.
and stuff. And I was like, oh.
Yeah, I think I think that's to do with the roguelike thing. And I think coming back to what you said, we were 5 hours in and we'd unlocked so little, made so little progress. I get the feel, and Ken says that this game is much larger than the previous games they'd worked on, right? And those games usually clock in at what, 15-ish hours?
20?
I definitely can see how this is a lot longer than that because we did 5 hours. And I mean, I've seen in the trailers the number of weapons that are unlocked and the number of abilities that are unlocked and hacking thing. And that's another thing we should talk about, the hacking.
Yeah.
We had unlocked only a fraction of that after 5 hours, so I can definitely see how this stretches out much, much longer.
And also in terms of like some things we didn't get to see yet, but we know that they're going to implement like puzzles and stuff. Like it is going to have places where it's like, oh, you need to flip this switch, but then what does that turn on? And how do you get through these lasers? Like stuff like that. So with that, the hacking, I do think is really cool. It's another thing I only was able to scratch the surface on, but I like the way it's implemented.
Yeah.
So
No pipes.
no pipes.
No pipes.
It's like almost like weapon wheel abilities where you'll press a button, you'll see an enemy across the room, you press a button to then hack them, and then if you're playing on controller, you rotate both the sticks to select different things. And it's 2 things. So it's an if this, then that. Which is so smart.
Yeah.
So it's like this enemy will terrify this enemy, or this enemy will power down, or you make this enemy attack this enemy.
Spill oil.
There's the ones with like the deputies where these like the horse enemies, and there's one hack called socialize where you can say socialize with another deputy, and then the 2 horses will like meet up and start playing cards together. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
I loved
cool.
Kamikaze. I would, because stealth fan, I would hang back, hack one thing, usually the biggest enemy in the room, usually that butcher boy, and I'd hack him to go find the nearest organic or robotic creature and self-explode.
Yeah, right.
And
nice.
I would just do that all the time.
Yeah,
but by defeating those enemies is how you would get those hacks, or you could craft them. There's things called eggs. So no circus of values.
No.
Damn it.
I know.
It's a shame. I miss his voice so much. So
Well.
good. Yeah.
But no, so there's a thing called egg, and you find all of these components throughout the world, and then you have to kind of decide what you want to.
That is
Controlling
something, resource management, pretty tense, pretty tight.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was
was
really overthinking every single one.
Conserving my powers, conserving my ammo as much as I could, and survival horror.
That's it. Don't think of this as an action game. I mean, it is, sure, but like it's got a lot of, I think a lot of its focus is about the tension that comes from managing your resources over time. For example, there's no heal, like no ability to heal. There's no health packs.
God, that
Okay.
messed me up.
The only way to heal is on each level that you load into, there's one healing station. That's it, right?
And it's one use.
And it's single use only. So the tension here comes from how well can you manage your health? How well can you manage your ammo? The decision to convert your resources, do you use those to craft a valuable upgrade, or do you use them to craft more ammo, right? So this is, it's not just a run and gun action game where you're just shooting everything you see. Most of the time, you're going to want to stealth, you're going to want to hack, you're going to want to use your powers to be more economical with your resources. And I just found that really interesting to engage with because it's, I don't know, much more interesting than just shooting everything, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, like, anything else we missed, you think?
I don't think so. Oh, the music.
Oh man, it's so good. So good.
Yeah.
So, if Bioshock Infinite had, memorable music moments,
Yep.
this one definitely did.
yeah.
There was one in particular that I just had a really big smile on my face.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, it has musical numbers, but also the combat music is this really kind of hi-hat led,
Yeah.
like
It's Whiplash. It's like
It's
very
Whiplash.
yeah.
It's cool.
it's
cool.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Every time combat kicked in, I loved it. And then after when combat's finished, you can just hear the music really clearly,
Yeah.
hear the hi-hat coming down, and you're just like, yeah, man.
Yeah.
The game has just tremendous style,
It's
visually.
definitely its own thing.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. There's nothing quite like it in terms of its composition, I would say.
And voice acting, all the
Yeah.
actors and actresses
But-
so far, really
Yeah.
good,
Yeah.
really compelling.
Totally.
A lot of
totally.
unknowns in the cast too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ken was talking to us about that, not in this discussion, actually separately, that he's pulled in a lot of people who've never worked on games before, and they're just like, he just likes what they've done in other places. So,
Really, for me, I mean, I guess like questions that remain is, does it all come together?
yeah.
And in terms of the narrative Lego thing and like your decisions and like the different characters reacting to you and, what does that look like 10 hours later,
Definitely.
15 hours later? That's the stuff that we don't know yet.
Yeah. And that's also not even the stuff that had we played 10 or 15 hours, we can't really comment on yet because the game is still very much being built. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's where it's at in terms of its life cycle. But I'm just really interested in the ambition behind it. Like I genuinely am interested to see, can you pull this off? A AAA first-person shooter, procedurally generated, responsive narrative, like roguelite elements. Can you put all of that into one blender and make a smoothie that tastes good? Don't know yet. But I will say that, at a high level, I certainly had a good time playing it for 5 hours.
I would like to play more.
There's no doubt about that, and I was very just intrigued by the things that it was doing and saying. And very, very keen to see more of it for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Well, I think with that, maybe we roll it over to our interview, our
Yeah.
discussion with Ken Levine himself, leading up the game, leading up this team at Ghost Story. So we will roll that now. Wow.
Vivisection.
No, we're rolling with this. We're keeping it in. What is it? What is it, Jake? Tell
This
us.
episode of the podcast is brought to you by Raycon, the handy dandy, easy to use earbuds that go with us pretty much everywhere. They have good quality sound at about half the price versus other premium wireless audio brands. I've been using these things for years now at this point.
Mhm.
Do you guys like throw a pair of these in your bag or what?
Yeah.
Oh,
I
yeah.
actually have multiple pairs because I have like one in my gym bag that I just keep in there because just never want to forget them accidentally or whatever else, and like one in my travel bag. And yeah, so I mean, they're always fantastic. For me personally, I like them because they actually stay in my ears. As I've said this before, my ears are massive. My head, very large head. That comes with large ears. And so most earbuds actually fall out, but Raycon's like the way they're shaped, they stay in. And I've always been super happy with them. They're just like, they're old reliable. You know what I mean? Like they're dependable, they get the job done. And yeah, I think they're very, very solid.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
I just went to, for this episode, we went to Boston and then I came back and I went to Boston again and came back. And so for me, having a pair of earbuds that is not going to die somewhere over the Midwest is fantastic.
Totally.
And so that 8-hour playtime is fantastic. I listened to a lot of podcasts.
The capsule that they come in is actually really small as well, whereas most of the other ones are much larger, so they fit really easily in my pocket, which I really like. So yeah, I've always been happy with them.
Yeah, the big thing is that they
Multiple
just
colors
check all
as
the
well.
boxes, man. They like different sound profiles, pairs up with Bluetooth, nice and easy. It's got awareness mode, noise isolation mode. Like that stuff is really useful. It like you can pause, take calls on it. Basically everything you would need a pair of smart earbuds to do, they do it.
For sure.
Yeah. So go to buyraycon.com/friends today and get 20% off your Raycon order plus free shipping. That is 20% off. Buyraycon.com/friends to score 20% off and free shipping.
This episode is also brought to you by AG1. Look, being healthy is really tough, obviously, especially for us who play too many video games. But there should be one thing every day that you do for yourself to make yourself feel healthy and also be healthy. And for me, and I know for the other guys, that's been AG1 for quite some time. It's 1 scoop mixed in water once a day, and it leaves you feeling energized and ready for what's ahead. Jake's got it right there. You can't really see it if you're not on YouTube, but he's holding up the AG1.
Yes.
Yeah. So you guys have been drinking AG1 for a while now?
Yes.
Yep.
Immune support, gut health, all that stuff. It really helps lock it in the morning as a lazy gamer. You know, like you said, 1 scoop water. That's very easy for me. I don't like complications.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think if I were left to my own devices, I would have, blood like pate and just, severe mineral deficiencies. But
yes.
And I'm always like really put off by how complex like taking minerals and making sure your nutrition is up to scratch can be. But just doing 1 scoop, cold water, super easy in the morning, setting myself up for a good day feels really good. And that's why we've been partnered with them for so long.
Yeah, we have. It's also a very rigorously tested product. They know what they're doing. They've been on the market for a long time now. They're very trusted by a lot of people. So if you go check it out online, you're going to see a lot of very positive reviews for it. It's sort of been a part of our routine for a while now. We really like it, and we definitely recommend checking it out. If you are someone that wants to focus on your gut health or overall nutrition or just adding something to your day where you know you've done something good for your body, AG1 is a really good option. So if you want to take ownership of your health, start with AG1. Try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D3 plus K2 and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first purchase at drinkag1.com/friends. Keep it in /friends. That's drinkag1.com/friends. Check it out. Thank you very much, AG1, for supporting the podcast.
Mr. Ken Levine, how's it going?
It's going great. Good to be with you guys. I've been a fan of the show for a while now, so
it's very
excited to
crazy.
actually
It's always
hang out
weird
with
when
you
we
guys.
hear people like developers watch our show.
Yeah.
It's a very strange experience to hear that. So
Well, it works because I think you guys get into you get into the conversation. You have developers on the show,
Sure.
and it's interesting for developers because you guys are talking about things that are relevant to developers, and you're not talking on a more surface level.
Sure.
So I've been enjoying the show for a while.
Thank you.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
that a lot. We enjoy your games.
Yeah.
A lot.
Yeah. So we're kicking it off with Judas. I mean, you're kicking it off. The game was revealed at the Game Awards, but this is the first time you're really talking about it.
Yep.
So how does it feel? It's been a long journey. You've been just like you and your team have just been in rooms working on this. How is it?
It feels really good. Sorry.
Yes.
I already moved back. The 10 years is a long time to not talk about things, and because and for the team, especially for me, it's not that bad because I've kind of, to be honest, I've kind of enjoyed not being public for the last 10 years. It is my favorite part of development is not the press stuff. It's being in the studio and making the game. I'm not one of the developer who likes traveling the world and, hobnobbing with celebrities and things like that. Cause I really just like working on the game. And so it hasn't been that bad, but I think it is hard when people ask you, so what have you been up to every Thanksgiving? You're like, well,
Can't say.
So it has been a little challenging for the team also, especially it's tough. And I really appreciate their patience because we didn't want to go out and just be like, oh, we're making this game and talk about it in a high level or show CGI trailers or just do a lot of sort of hype about it. Because I've sort of been down that road before and I kind of felt that it's not really what the audience wants. And so, we tried to do a very different approach, but that meant the game being pretty far along very far along before we, were able to have conversations like this.
So could we dig into that journey? So, 10 years, Infinite shipped, DLC is shipped. Where did Judas kind of come from? Have you been working on it that whole time? Did you take any time off after Infinite? How did you go from one huge, very intensive project to another?
I think I've got like a psychological problem that I think if I ever stop, it's all going to go away. And I love making games so much. I think, my biggest terror is that I won't, because it's my hobby and it's my, my passion and it's what I it's where I find a lot of meaning in my life. You know, my meaning is basically coming from, you know, my wife and my dog and my work. And so I think I do have this sort of irrational terror that if I stop for a second, it's all going to stop, you know.
As content creators, we can sympathize. Don't worry.
Oh, you
have to
even
upload. Have
worse,
to
'cause
upload.
You guys can't like miss a week because then your audience like, where are they?
This is going to turn into a therapy session.
Yeah. So, and that's a bit irrational, but so no, I really didn't take a break, and I probably should have. I've never really taken it. I'm in almost 30 years now. I started in a year, it's gonna be 30 years. And I've been, I started Looking Glass. And I think that my poor wife, you know, like I've started doing things like every year we go to Florida for 2 weeks now and rent a house there, but I work half the time and she's extremely patient with me with it. So I've gotten better. I probably didn't take a vacation really for the first, 10 or 15 years really of my or a serious vacation. It's really not a mental vacation from it. But on the other hand, I'm not complaining because, I don't have I'm not Sunday night. I'm not like, oh, it's Monday. I got to go work. I used to have those jobs. We were talking about this yesterday. The day job. And I'm eternally grateful the fact that I have a job I'm passionate about. But the downside is it's hard for me to stop. So I didn't really take a break. I was already thinking about, what was next during, towards the end of Bioshock Infinite. And, part of that was sort of like what we didn't get to accomplish on Bioshock Infinite. And so, I started thinking about this, not just what the next game would be, because that actually comes second for me. Usually I start with design elements, which is weird because I'm sort of known as a story guy. But, even with Bioshock, I started with the notion of like this concept of a predator and a protector and a protected class, and I've told this story before. I was watching some nature show and I saw, I won't get too into Bioshock now, but usually I start with the design elements. System Shock 2 is like, oh, what if we sort of merge, RPG and first person shooter, together. And this game came out of a lot of the frustrations I had with how narrative games were being built, how we were building narrative games, how I was building narrative games, and trying to think like, how can I achieve some of the objectives that I had in my head? But that meant a lot of R&D and a lot of thinking, a lot of work.
So then, because obviously this has taken 10 years to get to this point, right? So why has it taken that long? Is it the case of that R&D and that early thinking took a long time before you could enter the sort of pre-production phase, and you've been taking it slow? Like, what's that 10-year journey for Judas?
Well, one thing we had a relatively small group because I knew there was going to be a long period of as you said, R&D. And we had to build basically an engine on top of the Unreal Engine, which is, this sort of this narrative Lego thing, which is was necessary for making the game. So before we had Judas or the Mayflower or any of the other things that you guys got to experience, we had this system. And I gave a talk about it at GDC about 10 years ago because I thought the idea was interesting enough that maybe other people could also kind of run with it because I do care about game development. I'm primarily a single player gamer, so I really like single player games, and I knew there was a lot of threats to single player games because, the rise of, live service games and things like that, which are all, I'm different strokes for different folks. So that's, there's a lot of reasons those games exist, a lot of reasons they're successful. They're just not the kind of games I tend to play that much. So I tend to make things that are kind of games that I'd want to play. And so, and I'm very eclectic in my, in the kind of games I play. So my games tend to combine, like even System Shock 2 is pulling from, survival horror. It's pulling from RPGs. It's pulling from System Shock 1, obviously. Bioshock is pulling from a lot of different sources. I tend to make games that, I get inspired by other people's work, and I sort of try to bring an eclectic. I don't even try to bring. I just end up bringing a lot of eclectic elements into our games. But it's always in the service of like telling this particular telling this particular story, this particular game. So I knew it was going to be a long time. So we had a relatively small team. We started with this concept of how we would build in this very modular way. But that took a lot of research and development time and a lot of, kissing a lot of frogs before we found the princes. But in general, the concepts, and you guys would be a better judge of this than I am because you're encountering it new. I'm so close to it. The approach mostly has been successful in terms of achieving the outcomes we wanted and facilitating the kind of game development we wanted to do.
And I guess in connection with that, like 10 years, so Take-Two was your publisher.
Yeah.
How have you managed to keep Take-Two on side for 10 years? Because it's like, that's a long time to be, waiting for a game to ship,
Yeah. Well, kids, ship some games that make a lot of money. And then
Sure.
Well, yeah, look, it's an issue of trust, right?
Yeah.
I have a very good relationship with, we're this weird little tiny like squirt of a label at Take-Two. Like, they have a lot of big labels and we're a one product label, Ghost Story, our own publisher. But because Take-Two has this label structure. And so Rockstar is a publisher, 2K, Private Division, Zynga, and we're sort of this tiny little, like bump on it. And I think that they know, my bosses know that new IP is really important. And they also know new IP is really risky. I think, I was very transparent with them about this is going to take a longer period of time. I think I probably didn't know exactly how long it would take. And if you had told me 10 years ago that, I'd be here 10 years from now, I probably would have started to cry. But it was necessary to, to get there because it just was a very complicated, sort of technology task. But then you try a bunch of things and we, once we had the basic technology function, we tried a bunch of things, applying game design to that. And some of it wasn't great at first and, or most of it isn't great at first. In fact, we sort of have this internal philosophy, which is like fail forward. You have to kiss the frogs, you have to fail. And and the question is, do you learn from the failures or do you not learn from the failures? So for the longest time, we've been, bringing friends and family to look at the game, even when it was the very early stages. And for a lot of long nights of the soul, we're like, oh, we're crazy here. But, generally we, as a team, I think the team has been really good about, if you guys, one of the hardest things you can do is like put your baby in front of somebody and have them tear it apart. And we tend to do a lot of things we put people in who test in very safe situations where we tell them you can't offend us. Sometimes we even do things like, where we have outside people who are, we're only seeing them behind the one-way mirror kind of thing. Because you want that honest, brutal feedback. Yeah. And I think the team is very good at learning from that honest, brutal feedback and not getting defensive about it. And generally, every time we take that feedback and act on it, we've seen improvements in the next line of testing. So we've had a pretty good line in terms of people's reaction to the game, but we've been doing this for a while because there's a lot of, theory is great, but in practice, we have a saying here, and one of our pillars of the company is we're player facing, meaning the audience, we're not going to be there to explain the game to the audience. I used to joke about this with Doug Church when we were working on Thief. We used to say, we'll include a README file of why the game is fun. And because you're not going to be there. And that's really hard, I think, especially for young developers, even older developers, more seasoned developers, to understand that we're not going to be there when the game, we're not going to be there to explain it. That's why when you guys played it yesterday, I just stayed all the way.
Yeah,
right?
like no presentation or anything. It was literally, here you go.
Here it is. And the game has to speak for the gamer. The game will speak for itself. And you can't argue with your audience. Like that's another thing I think young developers struggle with. They want to get into arguments with their audience. At the end of the day, the audience is going to buy the game or not. And so you have to be comfortable with hearing their feedback. And look, I think we all know that sometimes that feedback can get really unproductive and really nasty, but you're not going to change the world. So I just try to find, even in the meanest things sometimes, I try to find, can I learn something from this? And you have to build the confidence of knowing I don't have to do anything they say. The audience is generally not going to tell you what to do. They're going to tell you what they don't like. Yes. And if you get consistent feedback of what people don't like, you better take that seriously.
As content creators with comment sections, again, we sympathize big time. So
yeah. It hurts, right? But it's helpful.
It hurts at the beginning, I think. And you get used to it. And then you do learn that process of like, how do you internalize this and like wall off those emotions and be like, well, actually, I need to listen to X, Y, and Z. And I totally agree. Yeah.
I would say, speaking of comments and stuff, some of the reactions to Judas when it dropped, it was like, oh, this is Bioshock in space. So what we were looking to get from you is why is it like being perceived, or why do you think it could be like Bioshock in space, but also why it isn't, more importantly?
Well, to some degree, why it isn't is, I think, more you guys can tell me that from your experience with it. But
Okay.
I think that obviously I've got a particular, like Wes Anderson or like Scorsese, I've got a particular eye, right? And I've got a particular taste. So a lot of my games have a lot of similarities. Like one of the reasons I think Bioshock holds up so well visually, from what what people tell me, is because it's not hyper realistic looking. So I tend to lean into exaggeration. One of the reasons for that is emotions project really well, because we don't tend to do I'm not, Neil Druckmann does something a very certain way, which has a lot of cutscenes, and he's able to use that, and he's able to transfer that skill set to making the TV show. But I don't tend to do lots of cutscenes and things like that, so not a lot of close-ups on your characters' faces. So the characters have to project at a great distance. To me, the world is a lot of storytelling, so we don't control the camera in the world. We're not doing pre-play stuff, so the world has to. There's a lot of subtle work we do to make sure people see what we want them to see, even though we're not taking control of their head and pointing them in the right direction. So I tend to lean into exaggeration. I tend to, I'm very sensitive to color. I tend to, I grew up, we were just talking about Spider-Man before. One of the great things about that early era, am I allowed to get nerdy about superhero stuff?
Absolutely.
This is it.
With, like the Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko era is because the printing technology was so rudimentary. They had about 15 colors, and the colors would just like draw a number of, this is the color. They tend to deal in these very iconic looking characters with big, bold blocks of color. So you look at Elizabeth in Bioshock Infinite, she's usually a 2-color, she's, blue and white or gold, so she has very simple color combinations because it reads. So there's a lot of things about what I like. I tend to lean into exaggeration the same way Wes Anderson leans into, formalism and symmetry and things like that, because it helps him. It's a lens he views the world, and it's a lens he views storytelling. That said, I think, probably from the conversation, it is an extremely different game from the games we made before, because of the very specific problems I had with the previous games in terms of their linearity, the lack of player real agency, and the world's ability to, like, you got to know Elizabeth really well in Bioshock Infinite, but she didn't really know anything about you. She knew something about Booker, but she didn't know anything about the gamer, because the gamer really couldn't do much to change her perception. I think we were talking about this yesterday. I think one of the biggest impetuses for making this game, we had a moment in Bioshock Infinite where I was like, and this was late in development, I was like, hey, it'd be really great if, like, what if, because Elizabeth has a lot of emotional reactions to Booker's violence and things like that, but it doesn't go anywhere. She runs away for a period of time because she's so horrified by, kind of what a monster he can be. But there's no point where she leaves, right? Where you do enough where she leaves. But I had this impulse in a meeting, like very late in the development. It's like, well, what if she could say, fuck you, Booker. Oh, can I curse?
Oh, yeah,
Absolutely.
Fuck you, Booker. You're a monster. I'm leaving. And then where would the game go from there? And because the way the game was built, which is essentially a linear experience that didn't have any real substantial ability to react to that kind of player choice, there was no way to react to the player in that way. And I found that frustrating, and I found it to be a limitation. Not of the team or anything like that. Just I had sort of designed a certain game, but then in the middle of it, I was like, oh, I wish we could do something different. And that's where the sort of concept of modularity and Lego and all that stuff came from. Is I wanted to build something where the game knew you as well as you knew the game.
We'll definitely get onto narrative Lego in a little bit, but I wanted to know, because we were chatting yesterday, and I'm really interested in what things you consume outside of gaming and even in gaming that you want to, that inspire you and that have found their way into Judas.
So I think I've sort of draw from a weird eclectic mix of stuff, like Bioshock was, I had read The Fountainhead and found it weird and strange and interesting and colorful. And so, that very much informed, that game. also. But of course, in that game, Art Deco was a huge, a huge inspiration for me. And just growing up, I was born in New York, and growing up in New York, and my father worked in New York, and going to Rockefeller Center and a lot, and just being inspired by that feeling and the time period. My family was a lot of immigrants from Eastern Europe and that whole diaspora thing. So and all the people, Bioshock is about it's a lot of refugees, right? It's people, refugees from World War II, refugees from the Bolshevik Revolution. So I find all these weird things, and I draw them, and I try to draw them in. And Infinite, I had been paying, I'm a history buff, so I just sort of turned into like the Gilded Age and the sort of amazing technological advancements that happened. In 1870, you're basically in a practically medieval world, and then then there's movies and airplanes and tanks and electricity in a period of like 20 years. And so I was really interested in that kind of mix of the old and the new. I tend to watch a lot of movies. I'm a huge movie buff. And so, and then I play, I tend to really like sort of auteur movies, Paul Thomas Anderson and Wes Anderson and Tarantino and Scorsese. So I tend to be really drawn to that stuff, really strange experimental stuff as well. The Emma Stone film, Poor Things.
Poor Things.
Oh, yeah,
Just watched that the other day. That's a
It's
wild
so
one.
good.
Just
It's
amazing.
visually insane.
Yeah, it's just his eye. He's so passionate about the visual.
Yes.
And I tend to like filmmakers who are passionate about the visual. And so because I'm incredibly passionate about the visual, and but then in gaming, I'm incredibly eclectic. Like I play almost everything. I know I talked to some developers like, I don't have time to play games, and I guess I don't have much of a life outside of hanging out with my wife and dog. So I don't have a real big social life. So I tend to work and I play a lot of games, and my Steam list is just like
all of the things.
insane.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'll play. I don't always finish things, but I'll play. I just like trying everything. And when they have like Next Fest or something, I'll just download all the demos and play all of them. So I've been playing a lot of games, and a lot of the games that I've been playing over time, I sort of draw them into what I'm doing as well. And there's a nod to so many games that I'm in debt to, for all my games, but especially this game, and has a pretty broad. It's probably the most eclectic palette of inspirations in Judas than any previous game. I definitely understand people thinking that way. And we knew when we released those trailers that people might think that, because it is one of, it comes from the heritage, the visual heritage, of how I think about presenting information. But we didn't want to sort of then say, no, but it's also all these other things, because we wanted that really to come from people playing the game and because me explaining it all or me promising it all, I didn't really want to be in that place. I'd rather, just show it to people like you, and just say, here it is, warts and all, you tell me what you think.
We were talking with Jen, person who helped set all this up, and she was like, "You should ask Ken what the first line he wrote for Judas was." And we're like, "All right, let's do that." So, what was the first line for Judas, and why was it important? And what was the first line you wrote for Judas?
Yeah, so this game probably is more drawn from my life than any other game I've ever worked on. And there have been some small things like, the experience of growing up, around New York, and with sort of people came from Eastern Europe, and all the, being very inspirational for Bioshock. But there's a lot of much more of sort of personal stuff in this game. So, Judas was always a character. Well, not always a character. I was like, kind of, because we knew we had this game. We knew we had a central character that you were playing, but I didn't really know anything about her. I didn't even know if it was him or her or anything like that. So I don't even know when this was, probably 6 or 7 years ago. And this is interesting because we had several years before we even knew any of that stuff. I was on a run, and I tend to do a lot of thinking, on my runs. And I bring a voice, I bring my phone, and I have a voice recorder. And I wrote this first line, it just sort of came to me, which is very much sort of similar to like my own sort of personal life, is I don't like eating in restaurants because I don't like interacting with waiters. And she goes on about how she likes eating from vending machines because you don't have all the awkward interactions and you might not say the right thing. And, she's somebody who like goes over those conversations in her head a lot afterwards. And so just by, and that, okay, a character who's really comfortable with machines, but really not really bad with people. And, one of the great things about machines, your computer never gets mad at you. You never say the wrong thing. You never think afterwards like, oh, did Microsoft Word,
I don't know. I say please and thank you to Alexa. Like,
is that weird? That
it feels no. People have commented that, and I said,
That's
well,
weird.
in the Robot Uprising,
I'll
I'll be okay.
I respected those.
Yeah.
No, it's weird. I found myself doing that sometimes too, and especially now with like ChatGPT, and it's sort of weird insistence on like apologizing and being very human, and sometimes chastising you for asking a question. So it's a bit creepy. I'm not a fan of I'm not a huge fan of that. I kind of tell the thing, shut the fuck up. Just give me the answer.
Sometimes they reply like, "That's not very nice."
Yeah,
Which I didn't ask.
Which I think is not really a great, a great approach. You really want to separate out, the men from the machines. But I understand the comfort, and I think I think this is not uncommon with gamers. I think my Atari was my best friend when I was a kid because I didn't have a lot of friends, so I spent a lot of time, playing, combat. There was one of the first games was combat, and there was no AI with the enemy, so I'd be, it was a multiplayer game, but I didn't have anybody to play with, but I would still play that. But the single player games like adventure and stuff like that was transformative to me because all of a sudden I had somebody who was a reliable friend who you couldn't screw it up with.
Sure.
And so I related to that line. And then I started developing the character out from that, with me and Drew Mitchell, my narrative director, who's been with me this entire time on this journey. And I just thought, well, why? Why, who is she and why is she so, bad with people? And why, what is that character, what is that character and what is a world that we might build around that character? We sort of started with that and the initial takes on the world, like fine, I can try to dig up the initial like opening cutscene we did, which is so different. She was there, but there was all this weird stuff that is completely gone from the game. We didn't really know what the Mayflower was. We didn't know what the society was. We didn't know. We may have had the name Mayflower. I'm not sure. But we sort of built the story out from that moment and out from her.
Yeah, right. So is it fair to say then that Judas is more autobiographical than any of your previous works?
I think, it's not an autobiography in any way,
sure,
shape, or
of course,
form.
But just drawing more from your personality and
also her relationship with Scuttle as well. And, we met your dog yesterday.
Kirby. Well, it's not just Judas too. Like there's bits of like Tom and Neff and Hope. They're all have chunks of things that I've dealt with. Of course, it's all put through a lens of people on a spaceship a long time from now, dealing with a situation I don't have, but I think there are universal elements. Nefertiti with had a very demanding mother who I don't know if you found in the audio logs from her mom. Always disappointed in her, which and have some of that experience, but also part of the reason I think I've been successful is I had a mom who was extremely demanding of me and the complexities of that. And again, it's all through a big lens. It's not like the Ken Levine story, beat by beat at all, but there's a lot. I definitely poured a lot more of my personal experiences in it and some of, the good and the struggles as well to inform the characters. And I've also, from a writing standpoint, a lot of the key writing is not coming from me sitting down and trying to write in a sort of dialect, like Infinite and Bioshock both have a certain Infinite and Bioshock 1 have a tonality to it that's more like period, or even Bioshock is, it's not even really period. It's sort of a patois, more kind of a Guys and Dolls is more of an inspiration for that, where this is a bit more naturalistic. And so I've done a lot of the writing just by recording myself, like Hope's talking about her, the darkness that she's facing. It's just me stream of consciousness out to a recorder. By the way, I want to be clear. I have a great writing team. We have a great writer's room. So it's not just me doing all this, but a lot of the sort of the original inspirational beats and the directional stuff is coming me just sitting there trying to just pour it out into a voice recorder, and then when we massage it and polish it.
Of course. I think it'd be cool to talk about narrative Lego. And it's a complex topic, I think. And I kind of would maybe throw to you to set it up. But I mean, 10 years ago, you gave a speech at GDC where you spoke about this concept to an approach to building games, and also, and that's to do with the way they're made, but also what the player actually experiences within them. And obviously that's a huge through line for what Judas is. I think we'll talk about this now, but I guess, would you just give us kind of the cliff notes on what that is to sort of set all this up?
Yep. Yeah. So I never want to make a procedural game that was purely driven by math, and algorithms. Like, Minecraft, and those games are great because, obviously, because you can generate infinite amounts of stuff. But I was like, well, how do you maintain that sort of, the hand of the artist more while allowing for the world, a way for the world to heal itself? That was like when I talked about Bioshock Infinite. If you did something radically different, the world was so rigidly built, there was no way for it to react to you. So I'm like, well, how do you make a world that still feels, because our audience is going to expect, they're not going to want to step down from us in terms of visual presentation. They're not going to want to step down from us in terms of narrative. They're not going to, when I play Minecraft, I'm not expecting a robust narrative experience, right? I'm expecting a very different thing. But from us, people want the things they've had from us before. They want the characters, the world building, and all that stuff. But I wanted to do that in a way where the world could pay intense attention to what the player is doing and then rearrange itself around that. So the basic concept, the reason I thought of the term Lego is Legos are a bespoke, handcrafted piece of brick, right? And they've I don't know, when I was a kid, they only had a few of them, but now there's a huge library of bricks. And not only are they handcrafted, they know how to interact with each other, right? And it's not code or anything, but it kind of is like mathematically. They build them and they machine them to know how to speak to each other. But then the user then creates, with these very few elements, creates an infinite amount of content. So that's sort of, I started thinking about that idea and how could you apply that to game development. And basically the system, we build handcrafted modular pieces. That could be a piece of art, it could be a texture map, it could be a sub piece of a level, but it could be a piece of dialogue. And again, we're not heuristically generating. We're not algorithmically generating. We have actors. We have a full cast, but we broke down a lot of the dialogue to what is the smallest chunk that can exist on its own, and then combine, interestingly, with other chunks, and to make reactive sentences. So, like for instance, if you're interacting with a character, and they are mad at you, right? They might have a lead-in that they can pull from a bucket of like, I'm really pissed off of you. And then there's another chunk which is like, because you did X, right? And that X could be very specific, but those lines aren't recorded together, right? And they're not thought of together. They have that Lego thing where we know that line, this type of line could lead up to this type of line, which could lead up to that type of line, but they're all modular.
And it was my job to protect him. But you cheated, didn't you? Going to Tom like that? You aren't just a rat, are you? No, you're the fucking devil! But I will honor his memory by making you pay for it. J stands for Judas, the fucking backstabber! Take her to the subway, Crockies, before the other assholes show up. What's the penalty for treason, boys?
And they all, and they exist. So it's very difficult because you have to build, and every piece of furniture in the game, every encounter, every piece of treasure is basically something we create and then can be placed by us. We train the game to be a good curator of content. So it knows what the player is doing. It can then react. Oh, the player's been playing really stealthily for a long while, right? Let's try to challenge that, right? And give them an encounter that's much trickier for a stealth gamer. The player is doing this thing and the character's reacting to that. Let's bring in this character, not in a particular cutscene, not in a particular location, wherever you are, whatever you're doing. And it knows, through a very complicated system of like sockets, like as you said, you're walking down a hallway, Hope will show up. She's leaning against a wall and she's talking to you about arbitrary thing based upon what you've done in a level that's basically being generated through a bunch of tiny little Lego pieces being put together. Every piece of furniture, every piece of damage you see on the wall, every poster, all those are being placed by a system at runtime. Now, there are some parts of the opening of the game, just to be clear, is pretty bespoke, the first couple hours. But then when you open out into what we call Act 2, then you get into the content that's pretty, the levels are primarily being, I wouldn't say they're procedurally generated. They are pseudo procedurally generated in the sense that we have all this content and the game is putting it together at runtime to react to where you are, where you want to go, making sure you're not seeing things that you've seen recently, because we, keeping that, pacing, the visual pacing interesting, the combat pacing interesting. We have work to do in some of these areas, but we've made big progress in other areas. And we can tune all these things from like central values as well. So if the game is like too combat heavy, we can tune values or too stealth encounter heavy, right? Or too gun encounter heavy, or to whatever. We can set central values that say, well, after this much of something, maybe the player is going to want something different. And then let's start spawning things a little differently in that direction. If you're working too much for one character, like you're working for Hope, because you're in this competition, the three of them are competing to fly you to Proxima, basically, to get you off the ship. And if the player's working too much for one character, because we know that we want them to sort of spend more time playing the field, we want to push and pull between each of them, building these three relationships, but they're each sort of vying for your favor. We want them to do things like show up and be like, hey, you know what? You've been working for Tom for a long time. They can do things like, if you go and work for me for a while, here's what I'm going to give you. And we know what's in their inventory and we know what they need. And we can give, like Hope is looking at you and saying, what does this person need? When you buy a present for somebody, you're not just buying any object, right? You know that person and you're trying to like say, well, what do they need right now? What would help them? What would make them smile? What would make them happy? And so we have the knowledge. And so those aren't like pre-written. They're all pulled together. So hopefully say, hey, I know what I've been watching you. You've been doing X, Y, and Z. And maybe you would like this. Or I'm watching you and I'm mad because you were helping Tom. And so we want to, and you don't have to do that. Like the game doesn't branch over to that thing. She'll go over a level, which is being generated when you get there. And the reward will be there, maybe around some tricky encounters or something like that. But we have the ability for them to dynamically vie for your attention. They also do it through story. I think you guys encountered something we call mudslinging, where you get too trusting with one of the characters, and the other character will show up and say, "Let me tell you about them. Go with me on this journey, and you're going to learn what you're dealing with."
Yeah.
Now, I heard Nefertiti and Hope trying to turn your head back there. They can't offer you what I can. Community, fellowship, a chance to lead.
A chance to succumb to Proximan microorganisms and to choke on Proximan dust. Your mission has failed, Tom. The flesh was not meant to survive on Proxima.
Now, there's still room for you in the mission, Neffy, I swear.
Don't you ever call me that again.
What, do you expect him to call you your Royal Highness? You just traded one delusion for another.
You watch your mouth, you little...
You fucking Pinocchios with your dreams of becoming real boys and girls. I wish you could see yourselves.
Don't you speak to her like that.
Or what, Dad?
Now, you listen to me.
Hit the bricks, Tommy.
Child, I am telling
Hit
you.
the fucking bricks. Ugh, assholes.
So the Lego system, the narrative Lego system, allows us to do all that stuff and to change the world and have that moment. If we were to go rebuild Bioshock Infinite in this, you could say, Elizabeth could say, screw you. And then you'd have to figure out what to do. I think you could, it'd be fun kind of go back to one of my older games and like
apply this.
rebuild this theory.
Yeah.
Go to Rapture and be like, oh, well, Andrew Ryan wants me to work for him. And
Sure.
hey, this is not a product announcement. No intention of doing that.
Sure.
But it makes me think about, like the limitations of what we worked with before. But yeah, the cost was a lot of time and a lot of blood and a lot of sweat and a lot of tears.
Yeah.
I was going to ask, I mean, so kind of seen elements of everything you described, you know, if you think about combat changing in Resident Evil 4, the Nemesis system, even XCOM procedurally generating. You've put all of this into one game. Has it worked out the way that you planned it? Have you had to make some concessions to make it all work?
It's not really concessions. Like the system, like, you know, if anyone goes back and watch the narrative Lego thing, like Frank the Orc doesn't exist in this game.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
Well, Frank exists. Yeah, you
Well,
met Frank.
Yeah, we met Frank.
I guess I got a thing for Franks, but no, in the sense that I think the system has worked out, at least from what I intended. Again, the audience is going to be the determining factor in this, but a lot of things worked very quickly. Like one of the first things we did was the speech concatenation system, which is the thing that puts different chunks of speech together to make larger things. And we tested, and can people tell? You know, and to some degree, I know your audience is more sophisticated than most, but I sort of don't want to, you know, I don't even, to some degree, I don't even want people to know how the system works because, you know, but we tested that pretty early, and that worked pretty well, pretty quickly. And that hasn't radically changed much. Things like, you know, the modular system for decorating the world, that was mostly, it worked functionally, but we had a lot of art direction challenges of how do you make this look as good as our previous games.
Yeah.
And that was a much trickier problem. And there is a tendency on a team and to fall back into old ways of handcrafting things because it's faster and easier. You know, there's a huge upfront cost in a systemic thing, in any systemic game. You know, you mentioned Shadow Mortar, by the way, which is one of my absolute favorites and another inspirational element for, you know, this game. I actually didn't play it before we had the concept for narrative Lego, but then going back to it, in fact, my executive producer worked on it, and I'm just such a huge fan of that game, and it's kind of a shame nobody's really followed up on that approach.
They made an incredible system.
There are reasons why no one's been able to follow up on that approach. As in, like, the Nemesis system is trademarked by Warner Brothers.
Yeah.
So.
But just like the conceptual notion of like all the orcs being built combinatorially, you know, and because they're built in a sort of Lego methodology.
Absolutely.
And, you know, lines of speech and you know, their hats and they all, so you couldn't have done that if all those guys were bespoke, because you can literally generate millions of different orcs that feel different from each other and millions of different encounters. So I think, you know, that is one of my favorite games of all time. And XCOM, of course, you know, both the original and Jake Solomon's version of it, you know, and Civilization, those are also modular Lego style games where they have a bunch of handcrafted chunks. You know, in Civilization, it's tiles of, you know, rivers and stuff like that. In XCOM, it's, you know, again, tiles, and they generate levels on the fly and they generate events on the fly. You could go, like, I talked to Jake about this. I'm like, dude, you could go, maybe we should get together one day and like do something where you have the same narrative support that we have in Judas, but doing a strategy game. You know, because it would work. I think that you have much more narrative support where your squad mates are talking about what's going on, and they're active and there's real narrative, but you're still building basically a Lego. I mean, that game is built very much out of like a Lego concept. All the individual tiles are handcrafted, and then the game knows how to heuristically bring in, so a road tile sits next to a road tile, right? Doesn't randomly go into something else. So it's rules based, and like our system is rules based.
I'm interested in. Because I watched the narrative Lego talk years ago, watched it again recently. It strikes me that what you're describing here is different and more ambitious than what you initially pitched with that narrative Legos pitch, unless I missed aspects of it. Because my understanding of narrative Lego back in the day, it's very focused around narrative and, like, you know, as in people's motivations, their passions, and what gets surfaced. And the you know, different factional pools and what rewards become available when you cross certain thresholds, when others diminish, et cetera, right? But what you're talking about here is a process of game making that is much more than just narrative. You're talking about literal levels with empty sockets where assets can be plugged in dynamically and so much more, right? So is it fair to say that that concept has been fleshed out and become bigger and more ambitious during development, or did I just misunderstand the talk?
I haven't seen the talk in a while, so I may be back solving that I had more of the thing at the time than I thought I did. But I think it was necessary to have, if you want the world to be that reactive and still have the same kind of presentation that that people are used to from us, we had to do all the additional work. I know that very early on in development we had, we were pushing on the environmental modularity and the speech concatenation system. All that stuff was like one of the first stuff we did. So it must have come very soon afterwards.
Right.
I may be misremembering. Like I may have had, there may have been more. I can't remember exactly when those ideas came out, but I know we started on them very early.
I
Like
see.
we were still in the office in another part of Boston.
Yeah.
And when we were starting on that stuff, and then we moved here. But yeah, it's been around for a long time. But maybe once we started sitting down and talking about the problem, or those things came up. I don't know. I guess I thought maybe I had more of that in that talk, but
Interesting. Yeah. And I mean, I'm sure like procedural generation is that kind of thing where some people really like it and they're drawn to it. And some people are like, oh no, procedural generation. Like they just sort of don't like that. They really only are drawn to things that are explicitly handcrafted. What would you say to someone that maybe has some hesitancy hearing about the fact that Judas has these procedural elements? How have you been designing to address those sorts of concerns that players might have along the way?
I think if the audience knows, like if the audience can feel that and they can feel this feels like it's coming out of a random number generator, we failed, right? So again, we have to deliver what people expect of us. We want to give the player what they've had from us, but more, not less. And that's what 10 years, part of the reason 10 years is originally I think I was going to make sort of a more AA kind of thing, more experimental. But as we sort of started falling in love with the characters in the world, I kind of felt like, well, I really want to go on this journey with Hope and Tom and these characters. And to some degree, to get that kind of emotional engagement, maybe there are people who can do it. I think there are people who can do it better than I can. Like if you play some indie games where they get real emotional engagement with very simple pixel art.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think you can do that, but that's sort of I tend to be more cinematic, and we need to build a system where the users just getting a benefit from it and not paying a cost for it, and that's part of the reason it's taken so long.
Yeah, interesting.
So with everything being pieced together, is this game intended to be like a multiple ending type thing, or is there a through line and an ending? How does it work?
I think that I'm not gonna. I don't want to spoil anything for anybody. So yeah, there's multiple ways there's multiple places the journey can take you, depending on for instance, who you end up being more aligned with. There are some big twists and turns, which will either we'll get into later or we'll let the people discover it on their own. But we want the player to feel that the journey, and I'm generally not in the past been a fan of multiple endings. I sort of notoriously didn't want to write the multiple endings for Bioshock. I wanted a sort of a singular, more ambiguous ending, but we're sort of setting out up front that there's these three people and there's different paths you go, but maybe there are other paths too that aren't as zero sum. Who knows?
Okay.
I know, but I'm not gonna talk about that just yet. The game has to be reactive to the player's decisions and path, and we want to support that and honor that.
Yeah, right. I mean, for me personally, I think the most surprising aspect of this is that this is a roguelite.
Oh, yeah.
That was a huge revelation, because when we came here and we're like, all right, it's going to be some Bioshock. Sure, of course it is. It's going to have some of that. And we knew the narrative Legos talk from back in the day. And we're like, yeah, there's going to be some of that too. Then we get here and then we die and we're like, what? What do you mean I lost all my stuff? What the hell? So that's huge, and that's a massive surprise. Curious how that came into, like how that happened. Like at what point in the development did you be like, hey, that actually is the structure that we're going to go with? Like when did you commit, and how has that been since that decision?
Yeah, and to add, is that born more out of the story element, or is that just fun factor you found along the way?
Yeah, we were playing, like we wanted the player to have the ability to fail and try different things. And we never set out, there are elements of the game that, you could probably recognize a lot of different inspirations for different games. When you move around the ship, you can probably, recognize some inspirations, on the surface of the ship that we took from other places. But the loop is something like we never set out to make a roguelite. I don't think of it as a roguelite. We call the game, when we talk about the game, it's a Judas simulator. What is it? What are the tools we can use to tell the story of this woman on the ship in the situation that she's largely responsible for. You know, you're the prime mover of the story rather than being a Booker or a Jack, you know, showing up. Well, you're more of a prime mover than you thought in those games, but that's a surprise. But right from the beginning, you sort of know that the ship is in the situation it is because of what you did. And so everything starts from that. Who is this character? What is their impact on the world? But we also wanted the player to be able to experiment and make mistakes and fail and fail forward, you know, that they can try things, try experiment, find that's not for them, find it didn't get them the progress they wanted, then try again. I kind of fell in love with the notion of the loop by playing a ton of Rogue. I remember like Risk of Rain, I think was the original Risk of Rain was the first one.
The first one?
Well, Rogue back in 1980
Oh, you played Rogue, right?
was, you know, those are brutal, right? You
Sure.
just die and that's the end of the game.
Yeah,
and I remember
yeah.
playing those games. There's a ton of, you know, a lot of games falling from that. But I don't set out to make a shooter. I don't set out to make an RPG. Like I wasn't, you know, Bioshock, you know, it's not, we'd have to call it something because, you know, what do you call it? You know, people categorize that, but I don't think of the game as a roguelite. I think of it as a Judas simulator and that element. And I think, you know, I think we want to keep some surprises for the player when you encounter that. It's not just a shift of perspective from the type of game it is, but it's a huge shift in narrative perspective as well.
Big time.
And you learn this, you know, it's for the first time, I think that people are like, wait a minute, what?
Yeah.
From a narrative perspective, not just from the loop perspective.
Definitely.
And I don't want to spoil that, but you guys, you know, I think you know what I'm talking about.
Sure.
We got that. Yeah.
And everything has to be tied to the story. So once we sort of decided that would be interesting to let the player experiment with failure and come back, because that's what roguelites do, right? You screw up by design, right? And then you start again, but you're more powerful and you're more accomplished and you have agency in how you're more powerful. It's not just the game telling you have this or that. So, you know, I really fell in love with that loop, you know, playing. There's so many games I can point to, Dead Cells and FTL, and it's a great game called Undermine, which I love, a little indie game. If you haven't played it, it's great little like Zelda kind of roguelike. But I was not ever one to make that, you know. I never want to make I never set out to make a strategy game, you know, for certain components of the game. I never set out to make a RPG. I set out to tell Judas' story. We set out to tell Judas' story. And then certain things just sort of raise their hand and say, hey, I might be helpful here in telling that story. So we're not hardcore about any of those elements because we're not catering to like, you know, competitive PvP. You know, obviously we're not competitive PvP, but there's certain things that audience really demands and really expects. And if you're not delivering in that, you're really screwed. We don't really have that problem, you know, except for I think what people want from us is a cool world, a cool setting, a cool story, cool set of tools to experiment with. But then it just sort of, that gameplay element came in. And then I was like, well, and this is probably one of those moments on my run where I'm on my run, I'm sweating, and I'm thinking like, and sometimes just it hits you in the notion of the, I don't even want to say the name of the place you go to, that real key change narratively that happens with that was really important to me. And that was tricky to figure out and create a lot of problems, you know, in terms of thinking about the design and challenges, because we had never made that kind of component in a game.
Yeah.
And you can't just assume you're going to be good at it, right? You have to
for sure
play with it and test it. And there's a certain type of reward feeling. Like you don't, especially in our games, I like our games to make that people can get through them. So we're not one of those overly punishing things.
Thank you.
We'll have difficulty levels where you can, you know, and we, you know, where you can be overly punishing. But generally, I think people play our games because they want to be able to experience the experience. Now in this game, you won't be able to experience the whole thing, because if you end up going, you know, really favoring one of the leaders, one of the big three, there's going to be things you're never going to learn about the other two, and that are be quite surprising and shock you about what you thought about them. So in terms of replayability, outside of the looping replayability aspect, we think there's a lot of replayability in terms of seeing sides of those characters and what they tell you about the world that you wouldn't have encountered. But I think that, it became a tool, and then it became a huge narrative opportunity for us. So I think that for people who worry about that, I think loop is going to be fairly gentle for that. but it's also, I think, can be extremely narrative rewarding for people.
Like I said yesterday, I was looking forward to dying in a weird way because
Yeah.
there
See
would
what
be
would happen.
there'd be subtle changes or new things to discover.
It has that Hades quality.
Yeah.
Where like death doesn't necessarily feel like it's punishing. Don't get me wrong, and you're definitely like, oh damn it. But at the same time, there is a reward that kicks in at that moment for reasons that we won't spoil. But yeah,
I think Greg and those guys who made Hades, that was a huge comfort that when I played that game, that we saw the narrative audience would embrace that loop and they'd understand the power of it as a narrative tool as well, right? Because those guys are very story oriented as well.
Yeah.
And so we were working on it, but that sort of gave me, it was a bit of a breath of relief that the audience, I saw it could be done, and that from a heavily narrative driven experience, and that the audience would fall in love with it.
are there things within the roguelike / roguelite genre that you think kind of are problems that need to be solved, or were there things in development as you began to apply this that proved very problematic for your game that you needed to solve does that question make sense? Yeah.
The biggest problem, I think, is what Lucy just said, is that you have to not be pissed off when you die. You have to feel like, I am going to go get a new experience narratively. I'm going to feel more powerful coming back in. I'm going to have some interesting choices. In the best roguelikes to me, death is an opportunity. And it has to be, because the original Rogue, death is like a giant punch in the nuts. But that some people love it. That's not really for me. Like I played those games, but it was never, because I got frustrated by it. I think that you tuning that curve so it doesn't feel like it's irrelevant, like death has to have meaning, and you want to not die, but you also, when you do die, you have to be like, oh, cool. Now there's some new opportunities for me. I can learn something more about, this other place we're talking about, where you go to at that moment, but also, and maybe some things about that place will inform you about the place you're in, sorry, I'm being super vague to your audience, but I don't want to spoil anything. And they'll encounter that fairly early in the game, but I do want them to encounter that. But I think that, there's a million ways to do it wrong. And we did it. Like, I think our initial passes at it were just too punishing. And, so that's what testing is for. And, so we just, everybody who starts working for us, the first thing they do is they play the game. Many people interview for us. We have them play the game, and we just suck up, testing data from everybody and get their reaction to things. And for a long time, weren't getting that reaction that you're talking about. Like, you were looking forward to it. And, and the way you deal with that is you make sure that, you give them enough reward, you give them enough, like, even like early on, it's like you go to the place and you don't have enough resources to improve yourself, right? And that's like, well, fuck you. Like, well, now I just died and I'm going to go back. I'm no different. And so, and that's hard because, game developers, because we play the game so much, we tend to be really good at it. I have a super kind of advantage. For as many games as I play, I'm embarrassingly bad at games.
Same.
You suck?
Oh, yeah.
And so I'm a little better at detecting when the thing's frustrating, because, when you have especially QA guys who are beating on the game all day, they're so good at it. They're just like, I don't need any of that shit. I'm just going to keep soldiering on. And that's one of the hardest problems of game development, is to be the user. I think if I have a talent that's special, the talent is that I can play the game and be the user, even if it's something I've worked on. I can dumb myself down enough from what I know, and designers hate me because they'll give me the controller and I'll do exactly the thing that they didn't. Because designers can often play the game, an encounter, whatever, the way they want it to be played, and it's very normal and very natural. It's not a failing, and they're so close to it. Because I'm once higher removed from that, I can come into things, and even things I know about, I can sort of intentionally dumb myself down. And but even so, compared to the entirely new user, I'm sure I'm even like, well, this is fine. But you really have to test to see, what's the right amount of stuff so the player feels happy when that happens, and not just like this is, we need our audience, the people who've been following us. They followed us from System Shock 2, which is quite different from Bioshock. System Shock 2 is brutal. It's survival. Like Resident Evil was our balance inspiration for that. And that's brutal. Every pistol bullet counts, in that game. And Bioshock was much more about a game that we wanted you to get through. This game, I think, systemically is closer to, it's somewhere between Bioshock and System Shock 2. It's more on that side than towards Bioshock Infinite in terms of, the sort of action versus strat planning and thinking and stealth. It's much more back in that space.
Yeah.
And I'm happy about that because I sort of, that's, I like that sort of stuff. And so we spent a lot of time getting back to that place and giving the player a lot of agency and how they, how they kid out and how they grow themselves and how they develop as a character. But you can definitely screw that up, and especially for an audience who may not be expecting that from us. So we want to make sure they're, we spend a lot of time making sure this is going to be a plus for them, not a minus.
Yeah. Bit of a, sorry, just to on this one. Yeah. In terms of like bit of a weird, like it's kind of weird to hear the guy who made Bioshock is now making a procedurally generated roguelite inspired shooter game. You know what I mean? Like I think that's a big surprise. It's going to be a big surprise for a lot of people. Have you ever felt nervous during development that you're like, oh, this is too much. This is too risky. We're piling in too much here. Have you felt that and then held your nerve? Have you maybe had to pull back on some things? Like how have you grappled with how much you're trying to pack into this?
I think, it's funny because the initial reaction, we had this on Bioshock Infinite too. I remember we had different headlines when we announced the game. It's like, oh, it's just a Bioshock reskin, or, oh, it's nothing like Bioshock. They just want to call it Bioshock because Bioshock made a lot of money. And it's frustrating at first because, people don't know much about the game. And one of the reasons we didn't want to talk about it out of context is I didn't want to really have that conversation. I wanted, this is a kind of weird way where this is like the equivalent of like our first cover story, having these conversations with you where we wanted, instead of me telling people it's going to be okay, we wanted people to experience it. And that's dangerous and risky for us because, you guys are going to have your own opinions, but I think that the best thing to do is to show people how it works because we're not trying to fit into a particular category. Our games have been weird hybrids of a bunch of stuff, but at the end of the day, it's really about what is Jack's journey through Rapture? What is Booker's journey through Columbia? What is, Judas's journey on the Mayflower, and other places. Okay. So I think it's very easy though to get freaked out and scared. And I think that's not unhealthy to be scared. I think though you shouldn't be motivated by fear. You should know you have to be aware this is not trivial, especially when you take on something you haven't really done before as a development team. You have to be aware that you're gonna stumble for a while. You have to, and you don't want to, and you're never want to be a place where we're just making a clone of X, Y, or Z, because anytime you make a clone of X, Y, or Z, guess what? It's not gonna be as good as X, Y, or Z, because the thing you're inspired by was driven by powerful inspiration and passion. So, I'm not gonna make an FTL, I'm not gonna make XCOM, those games are inspiring to me, but I can't make those games. I'm never gonna make that kind of game as well as Jake Solomon's gonna make that kind of game. Or any of these other developers. So you have to have humility, but you also have to have a bit of courage. Especially, sometimes I'll say things and the team will be like, and sometimes they're really right. There are some versions of like hacking and things like that in the game that, I'll probably talk about this at some point, that were my ideas that were really dumb. And we built them and the team sort of gritted their teeth. And I said, no, it's going to be fine. And then it turned out to suck.
Told you, Ken.
Yep. They're very good about not telling you so, but I think they know that if it's not working and it's not testing, I won't
hold on to it.
I won't hold on to it.
Sure.
Just because I think it's a cool idea and it came from me. But you're gonna make mistakes, and you also can't let initial testing drive you. Like, oh, if you have a bad reaction initially, they're wrong. You then have to tweak and polish and tune and see if you get to the places where people say, I was looking forward to that. And that's once you start hearing that, we kept getting closer to that. And there was a lot of time where, because you can hear that feedback initially and think we're totally in the wrong direction. As I said, certain things we have been totally in the wrong direction on, but then you just need can you Spartan, like throw that baby off the cliff. That's a dark metaphor.
They did it there.
You went there.
I'm okay with that. Like ideas are not the problem. It's execution. It's always execution.
I think with that, I want to jump over to the Mayflower and just everything going on there. The first thing I really want to know is style, where Rapture, Art Deco, like it's, okay, like you understand that language. With the Mayflower, it's got a lot going on. It's like grimy, it's flashy, and then it's contemporary because like people are wearing tank tops and t-shirts and sneakers. So what are some of the inspirations behind the Mayflower?
Yeah, it was a lot harder than with Bioshock. And I've told this story before. I went to Rockefeller Center one day and I was like, oh, I know what Bioshock looks like. And that was great. And Art Deco is, it reads very well in a low poly setting because it was, it is pretty simple, but very bold. And with, Infinite, neoclassicism was, a big inspiration from the time period and that, but getting like the quality of sunlight, took a long time, like just what kind of blue is the sky? Those things take a long time. This game is much more eclectic and, it's basically neo-Baroque and neo-Victorian. And we have a bunch of different styles, but they're all unified by they draw a lot of inspiration from a bunch of different architectural periods, but they're also embedded with technology everywhere. And when you look out the window, you're seeing a weird planet and asteroids and all this other stuff in the sky. So it is a very strange mix. And it wasn't something like with Bioshock. Once I knew it was Deco, that was a relatively straightforward path. This took a lot more trial and error, and we've been through a lot more architectural styles on this. But sort of once we sort of leaned into, because I do like drawing from existing architectural styles, because hey, there's brilliant art out there.
Figured it out a long time ago.
And I didn't want it to feel like generic sci-fi, because for me also the importance is that it feels like a place where people live. And that's, there are parts of the game that, as you played, because more content is coming, they feel more barren, but sometimes you'll come into a room and it feels, much more, where it has to be, because that's our games have always been, even back to System Shock 2. It always felt very important to me that it doesn't feel like you're in a sanitized combat arena, but this is where people worked and where they lived and they, ate and they had sex and they fought with each other and they had kids and, that these things all have to feel organic and believable for the space to feel like that you're not just in a battlefield. Sad elements and funny elements and tragic elements. So that was tricky though. And it took us, we kissed a lot. Many frogs were kissed along the way. But eventually, we sort of landed on that style and then pushing into particular lighting setups of sort of heavy noir, high contrast lighting. You see a lot of that,
some of that,
shutter effects and things like that. And so, sort of leaning into that. And there, I think we drew a lot of inspiration from, we were talking about, the cinematographer I was just talking about from
Deakins?
Roger Deakins, like from Blade Runner 2049, his use of color, we drove a lot of that and really trying to tightly control the color space. But those are things we've done all along, but I think it's much more eclectic than our previous games.
Yeah, definitely. It's no less striking, I would say, as well. Like, stepping into that space, it's really overwhelming sometimes just to see how imaginative the art design is, and like full credit to the team for what they've produced. It really is like pretty amazing. So yeah. Interesting.
And they had to do it in this new way where they're not just handcrafting it. It's all put together, from pieces.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we didn't want to step down from what we had done before. So that was challenging.
For sure. Interested to see, because that's how Mayflower looks. Interested to hear your thoughts on what the Mayflower says, because clearly we had, Rapture and Columbus, whatever. There were spaces doing a lot of environmental storytelling, and they had different motivations in terms of the messages they were trying to impart. What do you what are you trying to say with Mayflower? Like, what are the things that you're sort of feeding into that? Because you probably don't want to say, well, here's the exact message that I'm trying to put out there with Mayflower. But what are the things that are in your head as you design this space? Stuff that you'd like to explore or touch upon, stuff that you'd like to get the audience thinking about.
Look, I'm always inspired by, I think when I took a class in high school about dystopias, and that's where I first read, Orwell and Huxley and Brave New World and Animal Farm in 1984. And what I love about those stories is how thought out the worlds are. There's so much detail about the world, and these are just dystopian places, but they're not like some evil dictator came along and decided to ruin everything for everybody. Things happen for a reason, and unintended consequences is something, when we talk, obviously in Infinite, there's a lot of conversations about unintended consequences, even in Rapture, people's attachment to ideology, Andrew Ryan's attachment to this sort of, anarcho-capitalist ideology, but then when the tables turn on him, and he's the losing one, maybe he doesn't hold up to those principles. We all have feet of clay. And so, my reaction to sort of ideology is always, that how does it impact the real world? When it hits reality, and Bioshock was an exercise in that. The Fountainhead, she could arrange it so everything worked out because she had characters who were basically superhuman, super handsome, super beautiful,
Moral,
super adherence to the moral. They had no moral failings on that structure. And I don't know anybody like that. I love the book, but I don't know. So Bioshock was what do you put like more real people in that situation for the good and the bad? Rapture's an amazing place, but there are problems. This situation, this game, the first thing I thought about is how can I make a dystopia where everybody could understand how it happened? So the basic setup is that there's a guy named Rosenberg, and he has and this is funny because this is before COVID and before the appearance of large language models like ChatGPT appeared on the environment, but was using essentially a predictive large language model that was using data from the past to predict the future, which is generally how these things work. When large language models to some degree are very fancy autocomplete, right? They look at a huge corpus of data and they use the past to predict the future. Same kind of like when you read history, it's sometimes easier. If you read enough history, it's more easy to predict the future because patterns tend to emerge. So I thought there's another reaction to Infinite. I don't think it was very hard to get on board with Comstock's vision, of Columbia. And that was, I sort of painted myself in a corner there because I didn't really have a good defense for him, because it's kind of a terrible society. And I think I kind of painted myself in a corner. It's too late for me to back out of that corner I painted myself into of making this world be more understandable and more gettable. But this game starts with a kid who grew up, it's funny, originally this wasn't in his backstory because COVID hadn't happened, but his mother had died and his father was very religious. And his mother, he wouldn't get treatment for the mother because of his religious beliefs, and his mother died. And he sort of cursed his father and cursed God and said, "I'm going to make sure that that I'm going to make sure this doesn't happen again." So he originally develops a predictive technology for health outcomes. Basically the most fancy, the little crystal everybody has in their hand. That's a data storage device of your molecular state at every second of your life. So if you have that data and then you've work to reduce privacy laws, and we have a huge corpus of data about health outcomes, you can start predicting health outcomes many, many years in the future and radically improve people's health and keep people from dying of things, and become more, it's a bit of a fuck you to God, right? No, all medicine is a bit of a fuck you to God, right? And I don't mean that in a bad way, right?
Sure.
It's saying we're not going to let the natural thing take its course. We're going to intervene. And he wants to intervene. And one day his prediction algorithm tells him that a plague is coming, in the belly, carried around in the belly of 50 billion rat fleas or 50 trillion rat fleas, which is how the Black Death spread around. And this is before COVID. It's funny. And now we incorporate his backstory that he's been through a plague already, which is very convenient for our story and very inconvenient for all the rest of us in the world.
Sure.
But and he has a real mission, and an understandable mission. Is literally about the survival of the human species. And we haven't done that. I don't tend to make games about the universe is in danger. It kind of, a lot of the superhero movies, and I'm a huge superhero fan. It is a bit like every time that, the universe is in danger.
Yeah.
Sometimes the stakes being a bit lower is nice. But this game, I wanted to make a very grounded game, grounded characters about an existential risk. And so he makes a ship, he sells all his factories and raises all kinds of money and sells all his homes to build the Mayflower, invites a group of people on board the ship for a generational, many-year journey to fly to Proxima Centauri, where they can start a new, continue human civilization. Most people think they're cranks, and we never actually, well, actually, I won't get into that just yet.
Sure.
And lots of things go wrong.
Mm.
And the mission, as I call it, the capital M mission, getting to Proxima and continuing the survival of the species, is at risk.
Mm.
Certain catastrophes happen, and he starts losing, and they're results of human error. And over time, he starts losing faith in people and building faith in machines.
Mm.
And out of that, because the stakes are so high, he creates he engineers creation of an extremely dark and dystopic society that you see on the Mayflower. But we want the audience to follow through step by step. So it's not just weird madman, comes up with this. And he was motivated by the most compassionate thing of all time, like wanting the species to continue.
Mm.
But great darkness comes out of that, even the best of intentions.
Mm.
And I mean, that obviously definitely separates him out from Andrew Ryan, from Comstock, because it is a thing that you would connect with. And I love the way that with the big three, their motivations are all so different, but you can see where each of them are coming from. And I think for me, that was when because we had 5 hours of the game. I wanted to kind of push it and see what I could do, but I could definitely feel myself going towards one or the other, and then say something, and I would be kind of conflicted. When writing it, do you have a particular ideology that you have put into one of those two characters that you would go for?
Well, mostly,
without spoiling.
No. I think they all have a bit of experiences that I've been through. Tom feels that everything is falling apart around him. I've been on projects where I've kind of felt everything is falling apart around me, and I felt I wasn't capable of steering the ship, but somebody's got to, right? And so he's just the guy's like, things have changed. I now found out I'm a machine and not a person. All my memories are implants. I didn't, most of the things in my life that I thought I did, I didn't do. And his reaction is, don't care, keep going, because if he stops, he's going to fall into the abyss. Mm-hmm. And for Nefertiti, when she found out she was a machine, and this is all because, Judas's actions, caught, and so he just continues on. And remember, they were a family, and that's an important part of the story. It's about it's part of family breakup story. Tom and Nefertiti are husband and wife, and Hope is basically their adopted daughter whose, family died, or they thought their family died in this catastrophe. I mentioned that befell the ship that caused a lot of this stuff. They thought they were a loving family. They had complicated family dynamics like we all do, but they were together. And then this thing happens. Tom says, we're staying on mission. Mm-hmm. Hope falls into a pit of existential suicidal despair because, I don't know if you found the audio log where she's talking about her dysmorphic feelings about her body because she thought she was flesh and blood. Mm-hmm. And now she feels the electricity and gears moving inside of her. And it's extremely upsetting and distressing that she's not what she thought. She was the ship's, Tom was the sort of security officer of the ship. He kept everything in order. He's keeping on with that mission. Hope was the human. She thought she was the most empathetic human who was ever created. And her relationships with people, she was the ship's matchmaker, the ship's therapist, but she's full of cortisol sensors, and she can smell pheromones in the air. And so the reason she was so empathetic because she's a machine who was programmed. She also had tons of knowledge about that she shouldn't have. Excuse me, about people. 1 second. And all that empathy and all that human connection she had is all a lie. And she doesn't know what to do. It's too painful for her to live. So what she wants out of Judas is to help her end it, because her body won't. The security of the basically her software won't let her die, and she wants to end it because she can't live with the pain of what she has.
Sweetie, your poor hand. It doesn't have to be like this. You have this way about you. It triggers people. I don't know how to help you anymore. Why repeat the cycle when there's an easy way out?
And she also regrets her role in this whole thing because she knows what a lie it was.
I was so certain I was helping people fix their lives. Fucking moron. Everything I thought was true was just... Honestly, now the only thing I'm looking forward to is nothingness. And when you bring me there, when I see it swimming out to me, I'll let it take me. It's the only way out. Please do this for me, Judas. Help me end this thing.
Okeke, Nefertiti Okeke thought she was this world famous biologist who had this mother who was driving her to be great. And she cured a certain type of cancer. She thought, well, not for her mother, we'll find out. But and she was miserable on the Mayflower because she had to keep humans alive in space. She had to as a biologist, had to make sure that people could survive on Proxima. And really, they don't know what's on Proxima. They don't know, because when you're, we don't really know anything about any exoplanets. We know we can sense, we think, we speculate about water on them. We speculated, could there be life based on the Goldilocks principle? And if you're familiar with that, you're not too far from the sun, but not too close to the sun. There's all these things you can guess. But they don't really know what they're getting into. So Nefertiti kind of thinks she's set up to fail. And when she finds out she's a machine and that all her bugs can be fixed in code, and she can build a society where, she tells Judas, as you might have mentioned, has some mental health problems of her own and is struggling and has, her weirdness and her anxiety and her inability to interact with people. Nefertiti tells her those are all bugs that can be fixed, and that's a promise she makes to Judas. And she's thrilled with her, like she's relieved of all this shame and all this guilt. And she can build a society of machines, and she's can solve the perfection problem, because you can perfect machines in a way that's very hard to perfect people. And the question is, what's kept and what's lost in that, in that quest for perfection. So I was, able to explore, Tom, the guy who has to sort of stick with it because he doesn't know what else to do, and hope the person who has to come to terms with she's not what she thought she was, and Nefertiti's desire for perfection. These are all things I've, I think we've all had experience with. Maybe not in the exact specifics. I have more of the specifics probably, but I think we try to make them relatable as humans, even though they're not, and that but they've also done terrible things. Every character in this game has done some pretty terrible things. Even you, I did not want to make a character who's some kind of archetype, perfect heroine. She's pretty messed up, and she acted out of rage, and she created the situation. But you also, if you've seen the Reckoning Room sequence, you kind of understand why she's deeply angry. And that anger creates, she acts on that anger.
Curious about, I think one of the most striking aspects of the Mayflower as we were exploring it was the way the society demands conformity, and the way that becomes socially shared. There are logs that you discover that are actual kind of tweets that have upvotes and downvotes associated with them, and people who are on message, again, lots of upvotes, and people who dare to dissent, again, lots of downvotes. And there's one sequence which is a sort of public shaming, which we won't spoil the details because I think it's kind of really a fantastic sequence to experience, but it's very much about public shaming in some very specific ways. In what way is that a sort of commentary on social online discourse and getting cancelled, or is it a sort of more broader approach to the way history has dealt with the idea of not being welcomed at court? Or how do you what is that all about?
Yeah, I'm not really a fan generally of like talking about like this particular moment, because I think history, as there's this great line: history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And if you look at, say, social shaming, this is not a new thing. You look at the Cultural Revolution, in Maoist China. You look at the Red Scare here. You look at the Salem witch trials. There's a million things you could look at historically that where society or Inquisition, society uses, in East Germany and the Stasi, and kids reporting on their parents, because it's a very powerful tool, right? There's a line that Hope says when she first comes up with this idea for the society is, you don't need prisons if you can turn people into their own wardens, and so you can enforce norms. Sometimes for the good, like there's lots of good norms, like don't murder people, right? Don't be awful to people, but then there's norms that are particular to a time period and particular to an ideology. And often in sort of authoritarian societies, you get rigidity towards those norms. And sometimes those norms are, people might be really on board for it. Sometimes it's like, you can't marry a man, right? There are norms all times, and society will use shame and use sometimes they use the law, right? But sometimes they use quite often they use norms, hey, that woman's dressed like a slut, right? There are norms they use to shame people, but often they're tools of social control.
Yeah.
And also individual competition. During the Salem witch trials, you had people who would turn in their neighbors because they were competitors.
Yeah.
Of
course.
Or they were mad at them, or they thought their wife, they were competing for a woman. This is people often then use this. People can use it. Now, again, I'm not trying to come down on one side or the other, because I'm way more interested in just exploring these questions and having a particular opinion on them, because I don't know everything, but I like exploring these things, especially things that tend to return to society all over and over and over again. And we think we learned the lesson, and we think we're in some unique time where now it's the right time to bring out a particular tool. But then over the fullness of time, these often become times we look back on and say, that must, was that necessarily the best way to go about improvement or societal change? So the Mayflower has every reason. They think it's literally existential. Well, it is literally existential for them. Now, what they do to Judas, and she is a person who does not fit in. She's, there's this ranking system on the ship that's based on social credit, SOCRED, they call it. It's actually the money on the ship. Every time you get a like, it's $1, and every time you get a dislike, it's a -$1. So people who are in the negative space are what you call violators. People who are in the positive space are what you call pilgrims. And so there's this whole incentive to get approval, public approval. But of course, you could also post something that turns out the result isn't what you want. You can end up as a violator for doing that. So there's this whole, the ship has no sexism, there's no racism, those aren't topics on the ship. But there's always something there's an in-group and an out-group in every society. And we've dealt with it. This is not the first time we've dealt with these topics in our games. But especially when you incentivize it and make it the economy of the world, you can definitely get perverse outcomes. And, a lot of people on the ship spend time trying to figure out, how can I advance myself can I advance myself by doing things myself or at the expense of others? Also the ship is designed because they don't want people doing any real jobs. They don't want people, deciding who they fall in love with. There's all aspects of social control, because they don't want people raising children, because that creates instability, and instability creates problems, and problems creates catastrophes, and then the mission might fail. So the stakes are high enough where everybody can tell themselves, well, I'm doing this for a very, very good reason. And they're not entirely wrong, but the unintended consequences are you push a character like Judas to a certain place, and she's gonna react. And she's formed in the crucible of that system. And, and it wasn't like she had problems of her own. She was a person who can't obey, who can't go along with things. She does make problems. She is reacts to things and gets pissed off and doesn't follow the rules, and not necessarily always in an adorable, charming way, right? She really fucks with people, but they push her far enough, and she becomes the very thing that they accused her of all along. Would she have become that if not in that society? Don't know. What might she have been if she was in a different place? Well, we won't get into that necessarily, but we kind of look at that as well.
Leave me with my old
So when playing as well, one thing that I was not expecting was the structure of the Mayflower, because obviously you see the ship and you're like, oh, I'm just going to be able to walk around it as if I'm in Rapture. But it is, there's this kind of overworld map, and you get there to each different kind of region, which is then sort of pseudo-procedurally generated with the help of Scuttle, based after your dog, Kirby. How did that all kind of come together? And the fact that there is this resource management that kind of prevents you from going too far to kind of encourage you to keep
well, we know we needed a way to get around, and I didn't want it just to be some random thing, because everything wants to be tied into the narrative, and started thinking about, could it help tell Judas' story? And look, I had a weird experience 10 years ago. Is my wife had wanted a dog for a long time, and that was a constant conversation. We used to call it, you ever see the Simpsons episode, can we go to Mount Splashmore? Can we go to Mount Splashmore? It was sort of like that. Can we get a dog? Can we get a dog? I'm like, no. And I really didn't want a dog. And then I didn't get it. I just didn't get it. And then we got Kirby and brought him home the first day. She brought him home the first day, and I was out for a run, and I came back, and she was out shopping for him, and he was in his little crate, and he was shaking and scared. And I was like, oh God, do I have to comfort this dog? And I'm like, there. There's that episode of Seinfeld where George runs over a squirrel, and he gets to and he's like, you have 45 minutes. And we make that joke all the time. And over time, what I learned to love about a dog, kind of like Judas, they don't judge you. They are completely honest. There's no bullshit. Daddy, give me that fucking food, Sure. Sorry, I use the word daddy. We don't have kids, so I'm one of those lame people.
Same. No, same.
Yeah. So like, he's very straightforward. He's very honest. He's not. A lot of times we were working on this character originally because as you do, he is the craft. He is a big mechanical craft used to navigate the surface, Scuddy, and he modeled. He's roughly modeled off Kirby. He's got that big snout because my Cairn Terrier was designed to like dig out, dig chipmunks out of holes. But he's also not particularly obedient, and he's kind of a pain in the ass. And it's a big question. Nefertiti keeps asking Judas, like, why do you program a robot that doesn't obey? And what I love about Kirby is he's an element of chaos in my life, which I'm pretty structured and ordered. And he stops and makes you not be that way, because he'll go off and do something completely chaotic. And he's not, originally people just assumed he'd be like Lassie and he'd be helping you and doing all these great things for you and obeying you. And I'm like, no, that's not the character here. The character is a dog who is kind of crazy. And Kirby's got a lot of, aggression issues. And so, we had to deal with that. And he's sometimes like, he makes us laugh constantly. He's just really, really funny because he's not that great dog who's, he's not a show dog, in any way, shape, or he's just himself. And like, channeling a bit of myself, I was really interested in the relationship that Judas would have with something like that. And then digging into why she made this thing and, why it exists. And because I've always like, why do I love this dog so much? I never in a million years thought I would. And now I'm the guy who stops every time I see a dog. Could I greet your dog? I watch the dog videos, the rescue videos at 2 in the morning, like with little tears streaming down. And that is not me. People, I don't have kids. Like, I'm not that guy. But the dog sort of took me by surprise. And so I just wanted to incorporate that into the experience, because I thought, like Judas, I can spend a day with Kirby and there's no social anxiety or anything like that. I just hang out with the dude, because you can't you can't really screw it up, in the same way. And he doesn't, you never have to wonder, like, especially when you get, when you get a little more like celebrity or power, whatever, there's lots of times people meet you and they want something. Now I know exactly what Kirby wants from me. He wants his food. He wants his belly rubs. He makes no beef. There's no intrigue. It's very straightforward. And that's really, really, really nice. And so I wanted to develop this relationship, and it slowly unfolds over time where you understand why she built this thing that sometimes you'll encounter scenes where the dog is really fuck shit up for you. And that's part of the experience of being a dog owner, or being a pet owner, in many cases. They're not, unless you have a super trained animal. And I do not. I definitely do not. We tried, it did not work. So I just it's another element I like brought in, but obviously brought in through a filter. He's a giant robot that you ride around the surface of the Mayflower, who has a disturbing amount of autonomy at times.
He looks awesome, by the way. The design of him is fantastic. The first time I saw him, I'm like, how big is he? And I'm like, whoa, he's big.
Your sense of presence every time you walk up to him, it's like, whoa.
We like have a friendly songbird.
The artist did a great job, like bringing him to life and designing him, because they were like, because he has a lot of functions. You have to be able to get in him and ride around.
Yeah.
And he's based upon a 13-pound Cairn Terrier. And so, his long snout became like the cockpit you sit in and stuff like that. And over time you'll get upgrades to him. And,
awesome. Okay.
It took a lot of work to get right, but I think the animators really took to him, and we send reference videos from Curb, and
nice.
and they sort of animate off of him. But they're doing a great job.
Did you have fun out there, huh? I hope you did, because you're gonna get mommy killed. You're the most selfish boy I have ever met in my life. You know that? Right.
That's a good segue, I guess, because we really wanted to talk about the enemy designs in the game. They're incredible. There's just, never seen anything like them. Each one of them so distinct. Tell us how that happened, from little locomotives to walking horses and dentist chairs and everything in between. Like, how did that all come about?
Well, originally we had sort of more standard robots in the game that you dealt with. And then I was like, why are these robots on the ship? What is their function on the ship? Because we always try to go back to why. Why is this thing here? Everything in the game. Why is it here? And if we don't have an answer for that, it's the wrong thing. So we had a whole class of robots and you're probably, and they weren't very relatable and they weren't very interesting. And then I was like, well, why would they be on the ship? And the computers are weird, right? Like Alexa is not a woman, right? She is a bunch of weird code and algorithms and stuff like that, but yet there's a mask of interface, right? And that could be very disturbing. Like I think we're talking about, ChatGPT. It sort of even starts scolding you about things. It's a level of interface that I don't really like. But I'm thinking, if you're making a bunch of robots and you want people to be comfortable with the automation on the ship, and that most of the tasks that people used to do are now being done by machines, you better make them accessible to the people on the ship. And so, in the backstory, they were focus tested and all these different designs and, thrown away, and you'll actually probably see some of the stuff in the world where you see the old designs and find out about the focus testing and why people weren't relating to them. And they rejected them because they're alienating. So they got more adorable as time goes on. But of course, now since the hack, they're now not so adorable
Very scary.
And quite dangerous. So they live in this weird tension space. And this is one of those things I think the team initially was like, dude, like the horse was the first one, the deputy horse.
So good.
You're like, what are you doing? Like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, no, just give me a little time. And then I think the moment it clicked for people is when they get aggroed on you and their eyes light up and like
their teeth come out.
Their teeth come out and they get much more scared because they had to like turn into demons at that point. They weren't working when they were just purely cute, but but they're funny. And what is their character? What is their personality? But they also have to start kind of adorably, but also be kind of scary and creepy at the same time.
Dentist chair, man. The Cupids, yeah. I was the dentist chair is
No,
like the
they freak me out.
scariest thing I've ever seen. It, like the moment the dentist chair stood up, I'm like, fuck. No.
Speaking of personal experience, I had a period of time where I had a bunch of root canals
Yeah.
and that chair.
Oh.
So that's how that got
yeah.
in.
So yeah, that was another thing. I'm like, what if a dentist chair could, and again, it has a function on the ship. It walks around the ship, and when the ship was normal,
Yeah.
and it gives people dental care, and it knows who needs the work, and but yeah, then it becomes much. I'm sure we've all been in the dentist chair and know, and that's a relatable fear that people have.
Yeah.
I mean, even not even necessarily enemy types, unless I missed something, but going into the nursery and seeing the kind of nanny bot or the midwife bot was
I don't think I saw that
Oh.
one. Did I? Oh, I don't think I did.
It was like the cribs around it and just the moving.
Yeah, I know.
around. It reminded me of the monkeys, the psychological experiment with the wire monkey and the cloth
Yep.
monkey.
The wire monkey was a big
Yeah.
big concept. Yeah, how you raise children. You want to talk about the wire monkey? It's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah,
Well, you want to?
No, so there was a psychological experiment when it comes to discovering how, if it's a nature or nurture, and what they would do is they would put little baby monkeys, take them from their mothers, and they would put them in a cage with a soft toy, basically, so that they could cuddle on it. The other one would be wire, to see which one
And the wire, I think, provided
more
food.
Yeah, and so even though the wire one provided more food, they would always default to the cloth
Wow. Okay.
monkey mother because it was.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Oh, that's what's up.
And so in that nursery, I was like,
Yeah,
this big wire mother energy.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they, on the ship, they decided at one point people raising their own children was destabilizing. So they had to create a society. And you'll learn more and more about that society. But from cradle to grave, the ship is the automatons are taking care of you because they won't screw it up the way we screw it up. Well, the way we screw up our kids, at least in theory.
Yeah. Just sort of looking to, finish up the conversation soon.
Yep.
A few details quickly. Number one, it's an Unreal Engine 4, correct?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Secondly, are you able to share how long an average playthrough might be? Like, what are you anticipating where it's going to land?
We won't know until it's done. And to some degree, we have a fair amount of control over that because it's so systemic. You can tune things up or tune things down. And until all the content is in, it's going to be hard for me to say. But you guys played for how long? 5
hours.
And you're barely scratching this, barely scratching the surface.
Yeah.
That was a thing that was important to me. Like I've always valued, I remember saving up for games when I was a kid, and it was expensive. I got an Atari cartridge. In the 70s, it was like $30 or $40, which for me back then, is a lot of money.
Sure.
Because, that's back when candy bar was 25 cents.
Yeah.
But I'm one of those people now. I remember when.
Oh,
And I remember working hourly jobs and how much that was, and every decision you made on that scale, if you bought the wrong game, that was a bad thing. So one of the frustrations I had too with our previous games is they have limited playtime. Bioshock Infinite, they're linear limited playtime. And now one solution is you just make a giant world full of the activities that you've seen in a lot of games, and that the audience has sort of seen that and they're not so satisfied with it. So we really want to not do just, do a big open world game or anything like that, because the story had to be present all the time, and making sure, and I hope in your experience, it was pretty present, no matter what you were doing. But I also want to honor that money that people are spending on this game and make sure they're not going to zip through it in a few hours.
Sure.
And the modular approach has helped us do that a lot too, because using this sort of pseudo procedural stuff, you can generate counters and levels and things like that that would be much harder to do. It would take much, much, much longer. So combination of the Lego thing, the development time, and Take-Two's patience has allowed us to do a game. I think it's going to give a lot more playtime, but the goal is rich playtime, not just playtime for playtime's sake. So it could be, we might find out that the game sort of leans to too long, right? And then we will tune it down,
Right.
To make it what feels right. But that'll all be based upon players' experience with it. So I don't really have an answer yet, but it's substantially it's a much bigger game than anything we've ever done before.
Right. Okay. And how long? I'm not sure if you can answer this definitively, but how long do you expect to have left in terms of development time? Like, what do you think? How long's a piece of string? Sure, but over and under.
Watch me weasel
Yeah,
out of this
that's
one.
right, yeah.
It's funny. I don't, I think you can tell it's pretty far along at this point, and most of our work left is content tuning, combat pacing. We still have a few more. There's one big feature which I won't talk about yet that is still coming in, but most of it's content at this point.
Sure.
Narrative content, level content, art content. But I honestly don't want to hazard it. I don't want to make a statement here because I'm going to be wrong no matter what I say. Yeah.
Did you? And I'm trying to remember if the trailer said it's 2025. Have you
We've
given any window?
We've not announced
Can
any
you
date.
rule out 2024 at this point?
I don't want to rule in or rule out anything just because it's
fair enough.
We had I've had the situation before we announced the date too early.
Yep.
And then the conversation becomes about the date. And as long as I'm allowed not to do that, I'd rather not do it until I have a high degree of confidence. And for us, the high degree of confidence is, and we keep seeing improving test scores. When that test score for the whole game is where it needs to be, that's when the game will be done.
Sounds like a pretty good approach to making video games.
It's a very lucky approach that we have because Take-Two, look, I wish more publishers would make big bets, but I understand why it's tricky, right? These games have gotten so expensive that it's tricky to do that. But because it's much easier to do the sequel, to do this and that, and there's totally tons of room for that stuff. But in AAA, it almost doesn't happen anymore. And so we're in a fortunate position that we're able to take that kind of risk. And look, we may never know. We may be complete idiots. Maybe I, should have just done, another, game, continued in a franchise. But I like not knowing where to go. I also like that we're not sort of, I've generally not loved doing sequels. I've done a couple of them. Well, my favorite sequel I worked on was a game I didn't do. I worked on the first one, System Shock 2. That was my favorite sequel I worked on because, I had a fresh look at it, but I've really not enjoyed doing sequels. But it's hard to get somebody to fund one of these things that is a new IP that has a bunch of new ideas, because when you're doing new things, it may be ideas people aren't interested in. So the way I work with them is I just keep them in the loop. I'm extremely transparent. I built up a lot of trust over the years with them, and they built up a lot of trust in me. But we will give them a game, and my hope is it's going to be something that's it's going to make the company proud.
Awesome. And in terms of for you personally, so you're going to do this, and then what next? Are you going to kick back and chill out? Are you actually I've already got my next project in mind?
Or is it Ken's final game?
Yeah. What's up?
No, I love making games, and I'm not. It's weird because there's not a lot of developers who at my age who have been in the industry as long as I have are still doing it. It is a tough industry, and it takes its toll. I won't deny that. It definitely takes its toll. But I love making games. I love working with people to make something. I like seeing something come from inception to finish. I know I'm going to make more games as long as people will fund them. But I don't know what it is yet. I do think we definitely are going to be continuing with how we the system we developed to make this game. This is the tool I think I want to be building on, because like I said, it's more like we keep learning new things to do with this. More like a guitar, than a engine that you could do tapping, and you can put an amplifier on it, and you can add distortion. And we keep learning new ways to use the tool set. And most of those are pretty straightforward. Like the amount of narrative content that got in last couple of weeks just for the thing you're playing, rapid iteration, because the engine, once you know the path of implementing something, you can get stuff in very, very quickly and keep building on it. But then we keep learning new things to do with it, because it's more like an instrument than it is like a tool set.
Well, Ken, thank you for making cool stuff, games we like to play. Good luck to you and the team.
Thank you.
And maybe we'll talk after the game releases. I'd love to have another chat.
I'd love to too.
Cool.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Wasn't that nice?
That was a really good
fun.
chat.
Yes.
It was a lot of he was very forthright, really shared a lot. And it was really good.
Pretty
really
straight
good.
up.
Yeah.
Not bullshitting.
Yeah.
So
Totally.
yeah.
Totally.
So thank you to Ken. Thank you to Ghost Story for that. Also, thank you to folks for listening to this, especially if you're new. We know we definitely had a couple of new people coming in to listen to this.
Yeah.
So thanks for checking us out. We are Friends Per Second. We do put out a podcast every other week. We're not every week. So if you want something a little bit more digestible, That's what we do.
Digestible. We do a 3-hour-long podcast.
3 hours, but
You
also
can spread it out over
but you
3
got-
weeks,
yeah,
over
but you
2
got
weeks.
a while. Yeah, you got a
right.
while to work on
That's
it. Yeah,
right.
yeah,
Just
yeah.
chip away.
And we also had another interesting conversation while we were all together here with another developer that we'll be talking about soon.
Well,
But for now, this has been us. I'm at Jake Baldino on social media and YouTube. That is Ralph, aka SkillUp on not Twitter, right?
no,
Where
just
are you?
YouTube, man. Just YouTube.
Hell
That's
yeah.
been. I'm
Oh,
happy
are you
there.
done with Threads?
I mean, I still dabble. Don't get me wrong. I'm over there, but like I'm
It's drying up a little
Yeah.
I'm just like
Threads.
I'm just busy, man. February, I've had like no time for social media, so
Yeah.
yeah, it's been a lot.
bit. Too many games.
Too many
And
games, man.
Who's this? Lucy.
Hi. I'm Lucy James Games everywhere.
Well, that's it. Thank you guys for listening. We'll see you in the next one. Tie your shoes and go to bed.